was wrong to say. I wouldn't change a thing, 'cause in the story of our lives, the best of times through color glass, time rolls on enough to let me move on past. But every little now and then it creeps on back to shade my smile.
Vestiges After Dark is a philosophical speculation program sponsored by the Holy Nicolayan Catholic Church, an independent Catholic church inspired by the diversity of early Christianity and in communion with the Old Catholic Church. Presiding Bishop Bryan Ouellette presents perspectives on esotericism, metaphysics, philosophy, psychology, paranormal research, theology, spirituality, religion, and Catholicism. We are not affiliated with the Church of Rome. Our discussions of Catholicism are broader than, and distinct from, the Church of Rome. The views and opinions expressed are those of the individual participants.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to the first summer special of Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, coming to you live from the deep woods of Western Georgia on this July 21st, 2026. Well, we've been covering a theological series over the last several episodes, all the way from the end of season 13. And now for the first summer special, we are going to continue that series on Rome and the Independent Sacramental Movement and all of the confusion that exists between them. That's tonight on Vestiges After Dark. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the first summer special edition of Vestiges After Dark. Again, I am your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, here with my co-host, Jamie Wolf.
Happy summer, everybody.
Yeah, happy summer indeed. I am looking forward to this episode because it's kind of a part two to the one we did on esoteric Christianity. And this one is going to kind of go more into the framework, the original framework for how the independent sacramental movement came to be, and what all the confusion is between Catholicism as the Church of Rome and Catholicism as everything else. And
information.
It is. It really is. And hopefully it will clear up a lot of confusion for people. I hope that it will also enlighten a lot of people, because there is a great deal of misunderstanding that exists largely from the Church of Rome side. You think that they would be the first ones to be able to understand what happened here. But we're gonna get into that in detail in the second hour. I think that one's going to be a full segment. Unfortunately, I won't be able to cut that one short. But on hour 3, we will definitely have discussion, and even maybe take some of your questions from the chat, or you can maybe even call into the show if you have any questions about the subject matter tonight. I think that you need to stick through this one. It's good information, and like I said, there's a few things that confuse people more than the idea that Catholicism is larger than the Church of Rome. But that's what tonight's episode's really all about, and how that happened, how that came to be, and that dirty little S word. No, I'm not saying shit. We're talking about schism here. All right. Joining us from the great country of Australia, we have Father Chris Yates over there freezing his ass off in the winter.
Are you?
Well, I guess it's fall for you,
Quite
right?
yet.
It's still fall, right? Yeah.
No, it's winter.
Oh, it is winter now?
It's winter
Okay.
straight up.
Oh, yeah, it would be. Of
Yeah,
course it is, because we're
Yeah.
past the summer solstice
Polar
here.
opposite.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is. We're past the
So,
summer solstice. I keep forgetting that it's in June, not July.
The weird thing is, though, like, whereas in the Northern Hemisphere in winter I put weight on, here I lose weight because it's easier to do exercise in winter here, because in summer it's just too bloody hot.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so it's like 53 degrees today. So it's actually quite.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
I love that.
No, that's
Yeah, it's
actually
all right.
perfect weather.
So-
Yeah, that's perfect weather.
Yeah, so that's midwinter here, right?
That's not too bad.
No.
But then
no, and
again,
further in, it gets
I can
cold.
tell you right now, having been a Floridian for a large part of my life, 50 degrees is like Arctic temperature to Floridians. So
Yeah, yeah.
if you're used to
Oh,
the
yeah.
heat,
And you walk around the streets here, and they're all got 3 coats.
Oh,
on,
I bet they do.
Oh my goodness.
I was in England for Christmas, last Christmas, and I was there for 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And it was so cold.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've reached the point now where, even though I was born in the frozen north of England, I'm a wuss when it comes to the
It doesn't
cold
take long
now.
for your blood to thin out. It really doesn't. It doesn't take very long. I mean, I'll tell you, because I originally, when a young child, I was in New England, and basically the weather in New England is the same as England. It's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Cloudy all the time, rains all the time, snows all the time. Well, probably we get more snow than England does, but other than that, it's almost the same temperature, climate, all that kind of thing. That cold, biting, humid cold. And when we came to Florida, that first year of living in Florida, and it got down to like 40 degrees or 30 degrees or something like that, and it felt like it was time to go outside and enjoy it, whereas
Yeah.
everyone else was inside with their heater on, but I'll tell you, in 2 years, I was doing the same thing that they were, it's like, it didn't take long for me to be like, okay, now this is cold.
No.
Here in Georgia,
No.
we get everything. So I'm kind of used to all the seasons here.
Well, when I was in Georgia, it was mainly humid, and I mean, not dissimilar to how it was. I used to live a bit further north in Australia, and that was a very similar climate to Georgia. But yeah, and the thunderstorms that go with it, but I kind of like that. I think I like a bit of drama.
I mean, it's not too bad. I kind of like having seasons. I do. I think the only thing I really don't like about the climate here in Georgia is the 2 seasons of allergies. I'm not used to that.
Man.
So
Every year it gets worse for me.
it does.
Oh.
It does. And you get the springtime where you get covered
Tree
in
pollen.
this thick tree
Tree
pollen. And then in autumn, you end up with ragweed, and the ragweed's actually worse. So I find my autumnal allergies to be even worse than the spring ones. And when I was a child in New England, it was really just spring that you had to worry about. Never got.
Well, the weird thing is, I mean,
problems in the
because
autumn.
I had hay fever when I lived in England.
Uh-huh.
In Australia, I don't get it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I
So,
didn't get in Florida
like,
either.
completely different pollens, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had
Completely
no
different
allergies in
pollens,
Florida.
you know.
No allergies
So,
in Florida.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean, maybe it'll develop as I live here longer because it tends to be a response to exposure, doesn't it? But
Seems to
yeah,
be. Yeah.
I don't get it at all.
Well, that's good.
So
Can't complain about that.
when I go to England in the summer, I forget. And so I don't have any antihistamines with me because it's not on my radar anymore.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I think, oh, I'm getting a cold. And then I remember, oh no, it's pollen.
Zyrtec is my best friend. I
Yeah.
pretty much take it all year
yeah.
round. Yeah.
Usually, after Lent started, I start stacking up the Zyrtec because I know it's coming, and
Yeah.
I take it all the way up until close to
I
July.
if I stop taking it around here, I start getting allergies. So I just take it all the time now.
Yeah.
I do take Flonase, which is the steroidal nose spray. I use that sparingly, only during those few weeks where it's at its worst. Then I need both. I need actually both kinds to get me through it. It's so bad. I'm so allergic, and it's hard because, you know, having lived in California, Nevada, Florida, where I had no allergies and felt good all the time
Because
living
nothing
here.
grows in Nevada.
No, nothing grows. I mean, the olive trees. The olive trees will make you allergic. I used to have, but it was only for like a week. Only a week of the year did you have to worry about it. Here, it's literally all year long. It's just, how long does it last? You know, it's terrible.
And see, both of us live like in the deep woods, so
Yeah,
it's
that doesn't help. Doesn't help. But at least we have female. What is it? The female trees
the female deciduous trees.
Yeah. Well, the reason we have the problems with the pollen is because they don't want the female trees that produce the fruit,
Right.
because
They don't
that
wanna
makes
pick
the
up
mess.
pine cones.
So in
Oh,
order to
yeah.
appease all the landscapers, so everyone can have their perfectly manicured properties, they've basically only planted male trees, which is the pollinators, and the pollen trees that's what causes all the problems for people. If there were more female trees, we wouldn't have that issue. But that's
Once
what's
again,
really going on
man
right now.
screwed it up.
Oh, we always screw it up. Yeah.
Screwed it up again.
Screw everything up. And I'm really dyslexic today. So don't mind me if I say some weird shit while I'm doing this, because just having one of those days where my mind's just not quite in its game.
We'll go with the flow.
We'll see. We'll find out. Joining us from Tennessee, we have April Narad. How you doing tonight, April?
I'm doing pretty good, but I can say up here it is definitely summertime.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's
And
hot.
It's like a rainforest when you walk outside from the humidity and such.
Yes,
It's same here.
glasses
right
fog up as soon as
Yeah.
I walk out the front door.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's been really, really, really bad. You know, we even spent the last weekend around the pool, and the pool reached 93 degrees. It wasn't even comfortable. I mean, it wasn't even comfortable to be in the water. The water was hotter than the air.
God.
It felt hotter than, and I think it was hotter than the air. I don't think the temperature was actually 93, but the water was. And so, not very refreshing, unfortunately, but the pina colada was. So, you know, you get that, you know, it's not too bad. How's the allergies over there in Tennessee? Is it bad there for you guys, or not too bad?
I mean, I'm like you. I have to take something pretty much year round.
Yeah.
I can get away with the winter time, maybe a couple of months not taking anything, but the minute March hits,
Yeah.
I immediately stop up. And then I keep taking it all the way through probably November,
Oh wow.
Yeah.
because it's miserable.
It is. It's torture. It can be torture,
Yeah.
you know, to try to even sleep in it, and it affects everything. Makes you feel sick all the time. I hate that feeling. All right, let's get started with questions from the ether on this summer special. So let's go ahead and dive right in.
So the first question was a comment on one of your posts that you made, one of the shorts.
Okay.
And it was when you were talking about yoga. There was some kind of comment about yoga being spiritually dangerous.
Okay.
And the question was, it's just fear-based, isn't it? They want you to be afraid of everything that's not in line. And that comes from Stephanie.
I mean, look, fear-based, yes. Is it the motivation behind it? No, I don't think Christians are looking for, church leaders and pastors are looking for ways to, we got to keep people in line by scaring the shit out of them. I don't think that's the motivation. Is that the result? Yeah, it is the result, but I don't think that's really why they do it. I really do believe they truly, genuinely believe that anything that is not specifically Christian in orientation is from the devil. There are Christians like that. There's nothing
Yeah.
neutral. Other religions are bad because there's no Jesus, and this is unfortunately more of a problem, I think, here in the U.S. than other places in the world. But it is something that does sort of permeate throughout the mindset of the Christian. And because the United States of America is such a fundamental center point for Christian thought, it tends to be more accentuated, and it kind of radiates out to other places as well, but nowhere near as bad in other countries than it is right here and within our borders. And fear-based, and I try to tell people this, and I think this is kind of that. I don't remember exactly what I said during that conversation online with that short, but I want to say that my memory leads me to think that I was discussing how fear has no place in the life of a Christian. Not that kind of fear. I mean, normal biological responses to fight or flight, survival instinct, that's not fear really. That's just basically your body reacting to danger, which is what it should be doing if there is a genuinely dangerous situation around you. However, that being said, fear of the supernatural, fear of the devil, fear of evil is unbecoming of a Christian because it genuinely demonstrates that they do not understand their own religion. They do not understand the belief structure of the church, and they do not understand that when Jesus died for their sins on the cross, he did more than die for our sins. Evil was defeated forever. In both directions, by the way, past and future. And so to live our life in fear that, if we do yoga, it's going to open up doors to the demonic is absolutely ridiculous for a Christian to say, because it's
actually
over.
superstitious.
It's very superstitious.
It's almost
it's
like,
very
hey,
superstitious.
is this paranormal show going to possess me if I watch it?
How many times do we get that question?
Oh my God, guys.
Yeah, that's a big question we get. And Father Chris hit the nail on the head. It's superstitious, and superstition's actually a sin. It's actually a sin. So in a way, by indulging in that kind of thinking, you're actually committing an act of sin, whereas using yoga as an exercise routine is not sinful. So I think if out of the two options, I would choose the yoga over the fear. Okay. You're going to commit less sin that way. And that's actually a better thing for you to do. But see, that's from the perspective of someone who understands Christian theology. Now, I'm not trying to, pat myself on the back here. I'm just simply saying that I spent my life studying this stuff. Okay. I don't fear the devil. That there's nothing about evil that I am, and not even human evil do I don't even fear human evil, and I should, because that's the one that's really dangerous. Out of all the evil in the universe, in the cosmos, the one that is the most dangerous to your life today is other people committing acts of evil.
Unpredictable.
Yeah, because it's unpredictable, and because they can react with a physical consequence. And even that is not something that I go through my life fearing. I have precautions, of course, security systems, security cameras, guns, whatever life affords me to be able to protect myself, I will do so. However, I do not go around living my life in constant perpetual fear of something bad inevitably going to happen. None of us make it out of this alive. And I'm not here to try to extend my life. I'm here to extend my chances for salvation. So more life gives me that. And that's probably the most valuable thing that we need to be focused on. So a life that's not in pursuit of salvation is a wasted life, in my opinion. And I think that there's good Christian theology that backs up that opinion. So it's not just me being a little bit hard-ass tonight. It's the truth. A life that does not seek salvation is a wasted life. Because that's the only point for you being here. Nothing else for you to do here, except indulge your ego, and that ends.
It's one of my I mean, you know, I'm a massive Fulton Sheen fan, right?
Oh, yeah.
But
Nothing
one
wrong
of
with
his,
that. Nothing wrong with that. He's a
Hey,
little dramatic, but I mean,
about to
nothing wrong with
be
that.
be
Oh,
outside, right?
yeah. Yeah, he's a man of his time and his era, you know. One of his great topics was wasting your life.
Yeah.
And of course he meant it in the positive sense, like, you know, because he was pointing out that you know, a life dedicated to serving God and other people, and, you know, to self-denial and prayer and all the rest of it. He said that's the way you should waste your life, you know, because of course the materialists think that's a complete waste of life, you know, because for a materialist, the only point of life is sort of pleasure,
Self-indulgence.
and so
Yeah.
this hedonistic ego drama. And again, another one of his terms, you know, instead of being in the ego drama, we should be drawn into the theodrama. You know, you can imagine him saying it, the theodrama. You know?
Oh yeah, I can hear him. Yeah, he's very melodramatic.
That's right. But in that way, so if you're going to waste your life, you should waste it in serving God and your neighbor. You know.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely, and I think that's
not a waste.
Not a waste,
not.
and a Christian that understands that would never even think of having to be fearful of yoga, something like that. So it's not fear-based because it's like there's some dirty, rotten church leadership out there trying to be like, let's make people fearful.
Fear is the wrong response.
Yeah.
The right response is to teach people and to say, actually, the spirituality or the theology behind yoga is not the fullness of the truth. And
Right.
so, you know, just as I would say, like, I'm not superstitious. If somebody decides to go to a mosque, they're not gonna, you know, spontaneously combust. I've been in mosques,
Yeah.
but I also believe that that's not the fullness of the truth. So if you're going to dedicate your spiritual life to that, I would say that you're making a mistake. I mean, you're free to make a mistake, but you're making a mistake, because the fullness of it is Jesus Christ, who's our Lord and God and Savior, God incarnate. So so it's not to say that it's wrong to be critical of, or to want to say to somebody who's involved in yogic practices that are in fact religious rather than just exercise, because Pilates is basically the same thing, right? Pilates is yoga without the spirituality, and so I think it's okay to correct someone on that, but to go further, like you've said, and to say, oh, you know, that's it is actually to give yoga some credit it doesn't deserve.
Well, I
know?
think they're assuming that, and then we're let's face it, we're talking about hatha yoga here. We're not talking about all the other variations of it that do have more
Sure.
spiritual components. We're talking about the physical postures and things of that nature that people will use it for. And you know, there are people that will argue that you can't really separate the spirituality from the system. And then there are some that say yes, you can. As a person that, you know, very loosely studied all of the various paths of yoga, at least a working understanding of them all, I can say you can absolutely separate them, because they're not dogmatic instruments of the religion of Hinduism. They are systems, and see, that's where Western thinking has a hard time understanding Eastern thinking. And vice versa, they have a hard time with our very much by the book type of spirituality, where, you know, theirs is so existential and practical, in the sense of, you know,
I think it's a similar problem to the problem that especially Protestants where you live have with Catholicism, because it's actually you know, it's so imbued with rationalism and Enlightenment thinking. And those things aren't bad things, by the way. Like, so I'm nuanced about these things.
Sure.
Like, you know, the Reformation has its fruition in Trent, right? So I'm not anti-Reformation. I just think that some Protestants stopped too soon. But the thinking is the same problem. It's this sort of hyper rationalist. So. And part of that is to categorize everything into categories that we understand. And when you're doing that to something that's from a very different culture, you're always going to have a category error, like by definition.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, what I think people need to understand is that worship in the East is not the same thing as worship in the West. So that's the first thing. You know, even though Hindus have a pantheon of various gods and goddesses, as we've talked about on this show before. It's not really a polytheism in the sense of paganism that we see in the West. It's more of a emanations of the one true and unified God. So Hinduism is really a monotheistic, and the reason that they actually understand Catholic, I should say Christian theology, really. The reason they understand Christian theology and so well is because the Trinitarian concept is very familiar to them. They have a very similar thing, and they understand this idea of God being able to exist in multiple different ways. And so that's not a problem. It's just instead of the three persons of the Holy Trinity, they have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of gods and goddesses, but all of them are Brahma. So, it's not exactly, or Brahman rather, all of them are Brahman. So it's not exactly a polytheistic system. Now, when a person is entering into these postures that align to a particular god or goddess, it is not done as an act of worship or devotion to that deity. It is done in order to receive the benefits of that particular aspect of God. So this is in the West. We don't really have a equivalency to this, other than the fact that in Catholicism, you lose an article of something and you can go to, you can pray to Saint Anthony. And it's like, well, why don't you just ask Jesus for it? But I mean, it's a common traditional practice to pray to Saint Anthony. You're having a really hard time, go to Saint Jude, patron of lost cases, right? Saint Michael for protection, right? Saint, was it Christopher for travelers? Mm-hmm. All of these things are aspects of God, right? It's not as though and we even say praying to, you're not even praying to them, you're asking for their intercession, you're asking for their prayers. It's just, Catholic vernacular is kind of bad in that sense that we say pray to. But that's the closest thing that we have, and no Catholic would ever think for a minute that they're worshiping Saint Christopher, or they're worshiping Saint Michael, or they're worshiping Saint Jude. We know what we're doing when we do those things, and the same thing is true in Hinduism. That they know that that all of these aspects of God is Brahman, is the one true God as they understand it. Is this a perfect understanding? Well, Christianity would say no, and I accept that. But at the same time, it's not exactly what Christians are saying about it. And I think it's important to clarify that. So no, yoga is not evil. It's not going to bring the devil into your life. Don't listen to these. There's a lot of exorcists right now. I want to say it's like the church exploded. Ever since we started having a bit of a platform where my face became the sort of the face of exorcism and conversation, and Dateline interviewed me, all these things, and you type in exorcism and my picture comes up. Now all of a sudden they're all chatty Cathys in the church. Now there's all these priests coming out of the woodwork to talk about exorcism, whereas before they wouldn't even be allowed to broach the subject. Now they're all over the place. Podcasts, going on these big podcasts to try to get even more recognition, to try to, I think, outdo me. I really do. And I'm not trying to be egotistical here. I really do think that they were bothered by the fact that the only person talking about it with the name Catholic on it was me. And so they wanted to get, because I'm full of error, as you're going to see tonight. I'm so full of error according to them, that they had to make sure that there was good information out there. But all these guys, I mean, a lot of them, well, not all of them, I'm not going to say all of them, but a lot of the ones I've listened to, and I have a hard time getting through their interviews, let me tell you, because it's horrible, the things that some of them say. But a lot of them were saying that yoga will bring demons into your life, and these are Catholic exorcists saying this. So no, this is just not true.
You know what yoga brought into my life? Flexibility. And if it's the demon of flexibility,
You'll
hey,
take it, you know?
I'll tame that demon and we'll get along.
Yeah,
'Cause it really helped me with my flexibility.
Yeah, 'cause,
especially after the accident.
nothing the
Yoga
devil
and qigong.
nothing the devil wants more than for you to feel good, right?
Yeah.
but well, actually,
Good stretch.
the devil does like us to feel good. He likes the party before
Under
the
his
hangover.
yeah,
but,
under his circumstances, yeah.
But I guess what I would say is, if you're doing calisthenics in the military, okay, if you're doing military calisthenics,
Yep.
And it helps you with your fitness, with your flexibility, with recovery, all the rest of it. No one in the world would say there's anything to worry about that. Okay, the difference is with yoga, there are these things attached to it.
Yeah.
So now that's as you've said, most people in America, Australia who are offering yoga are in fact offering stretching sessions, right? So
Yes.
if that's what we're talking about, there's literally nothing to worry about because all that is just stretching and it's Pilates, okay? But we must be honest and say yoga is not a neutral like actual yoga, and as you've said, there's multiple variations of this, most of which are not offered at all in any of these places that are called it. But something that is less than Christianity. And so, personally, I would advise somebody not to waste their time with that stuff. Okay, you want to stretch and get flexible, no dramas at all. But actually bringing in those elements to it, I don't think it welcomes a demon into your life, but I think it can be a distraction from, well, put it this way, if they end up knowing more about yogic sort of spirituality than they know about the Christian faith, then they're not aligning their time well.
Or maybe they're just maybe they're not as Christian as they thought they were. And I mean, at some point you might be like, well, maybe this is
Yeah, if you're pulled away from your faith that easily, maybe you were
I mean,
kind of on the wrong path to begin with.
But again, I think there's a difference because where you are, most people default are Christians, whereas where I am, most people default are not Christians.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm also speaking into a different category probably.
Yeah.
What I see here is most of the people doing yoga around where I live, and I live in a very metrosexual part of Sydney. I don't fit in very well around here. But most of the people I see doing yoga here are the sort of mums who wear lycra all day, every day, whether they're doing any exercise or not.
You want to know what the real irony is, though, Father, about that? What you just said. What the real irony is that you're too Christian for them, and I'm not Christian enough for them here.
Well, that's right.
That's the problem.
Yeah, because it's a different scenario. So, and most of the Lululemon ladies around here wouldn't know Christianity if it hit them in the face. They've got no interest in that.
They have no interest.
Not the Lululemon.
They're post-Christian. So if they're going to yoga, that in fact is their entire spirituality, even if it's really crappy Western version of it.
Well, and the way I would look at that, as an exorcist, as a priest, as a bishop, even as a lay person, the way I would look at that is at least they're practicing some spirituality. They're not completely materialist.
And if you ever get to have a conversation with these people, then you start there, right? Okay. Yeah. You have an awareness that there's more to life than Lululemon.
And that's
lycra.
And that might be as far as they're able to go.
Of course.
So I think still, in that context, that's still better than nothing at all. I mean,
it's better than being a communist.
Oh, well, anything's better than that, right? Yeah.
Yes.
But I don't think to really get to the specific.
New York is that?
Yeah, I know, right? Oh my God! Don't even get me started on New York.
They can have it.
But
sorry, I should have said that.
No, you're fine. No, not at all. I mean, not at all. But I would say that to answer the question, to get specific with the question, it's not fear-based because there's these, conspiracy in the church to make everybody fearful. That's nonsense. That's not true. It's what they're teaching. They genuinely feel is the right thing to teach. It's wrong. It's erroneous. It's superstitious, but it is what they feel is right. Now, this is where a little discernment goes a long way. Okay. And the problem is with the church today is not because they teach a lesson of fear. The problem with the church today is that they don't teach discernment. You wouldn't need to
That's
teach
a
about
fact.
fear. You wouldn't need to teach about fear if you taught discernment, but they don't teach discernment. You know why? Because they don't have it themselves. Most of these pastors don't even have it themselves.
It's also, it's a very difficult thing to teach, and some
Yeah.
people can't do it. Like it's a spiritual gift.
Well, it is a gift. You can't.
Yeah.
You can't.
No, now we
Yeah.
teach other gifts. I'm not saying that we don't. You know,
Yeah.
but
Well, we teach love, right?
it is-
But doesn't mean everyone knows how to have it.
no, but discernment's probably the hardest, right?
I would say.
Spiritual discernment, especially.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, look at political discernment. How terribly low that is. The populace. So spiritual discernment, forget about it. I mean, that, you know.
So maybe yoga can give them a little discernment.
It's a matter of spiritual maturity.
It is. It really is.
It takes time.
So
most parish churches are filled with people who have almost no discernment ability whatsoever.
So do they teach fear?
I
Yeah.
think.
Do they teach fear? Yes. But is it fear based for the sake of trying to scare people? No, it is not. So that's that one, April. I think.
There.
Yeah. So there.
All right. Next question. Regarding the same reoccurring archetypal themes, specifically each culture having a flood narrative, if we trace these back to the first reflection, what are we to learn from them? And it goes on to say, I understand in the past you have said the flood in Genesis was a precursor to baptism, but what of the other cultures?
We learned something, and I believe this is how I answered the question. We learn the same thing regardless of which one we choose to make authoritative. Do we not? I mean, do we not, regardless of which culture you're looking at, where it came from? Because these are, look, this is a pervasive story that sort of transcends culture and geography. There's a lot of different documents from different places and different worldviews that record a similar type of story. Yeah. Now, we can look at that archetypally in a few ways. We can look at it historically, too. We can say, well, maybe it's like this because it actually happened, or something of that nature actually happened. I think there's a framework for that. I think it's very clear this earth goes through radical changes through time. We always think in terms of our own egocentric path, so right now, global warming's been this topic of conversation for years. And I don't think anybody denies that there is climate change. I think they question whether or not we are powerful enough to actually affect change in that way, or are these just natural global cycles? Well, we know that the earth heats up and the earth cools down, and that's been going on for longer than we've been around on this planet. So this is something that is very plausible, that somewhere in the back of pre-recorded history, there's this memory of this happening. And so all these cultures recorded some story about it. Now, let's look at this, though, theologically, because I think that's the more interesting way to discuss this. Because if we're looking at this from the standpoint that the flood narrative is a foreshadowing to baptism, which the church says it is, all right, the fathers of the church saw it that way. That's how we interpret this as Christians. And I happen to be one of them that does. I do, in fact, see that as an archetypal foreshadowing to the sacrament. Does it matter does it have to come strictly through the Genesis story, the Jewish one, or can we look at all the other ones too and say, well, isn't that sort of foreshadowing the same thing? I think the problem, and look, this is something, and we're going to get into that a little bit in the next hour, because it's kind of, an appropriate question for tonight's topic. The problem with Christianity is they tended to adopt a little bit, maybe a lot in some cases, this kind of elitism. And it's a type of elitism where it's like, we're the special ones. And, the Jewish people have sort of that claim, right? I mean, they were God's chosen people, and God chose them to share his revelation with, and we are now the inheritors of that revelation. So while that's theologically true, I don't think it's licensed to now be like, okay, we're better and, we're special because we were chosen. I don't think that's the right way to look at that. I think we can look at it and say that the message has been out there. We were the ones that were perhaps chosen because we were the ones that were the most capable of receiving it. I don't necessarily think that God picked or created a specific race to say, these are going to be the ones that I share this with. I think it's really that God goes to the path of least resistance of things like this, and whoever can best get the message across to accomplish the path of the plan of salvation is who gets the message. And so I think the information's available. And this is where I think the church gets into this idea, which it gets into trouble with some of the more conservative branches, as we will also talk about in the next hour, this idea that there's the truth of Christ in all religions, just imperfectly there. I think this is an example of that, because I think that this is an example of God sharing his revelation with the world, but these other places just don't quite get it exactly the same way or the right way, the right way for however it is that we decide we're going to interpret that. And at least in Judeo-Christian theology, the interpretation is that the Jews were the ones that received it, and the Christians became the inheritors of it. But I don't think if it's the Mesopotamian one versus the Greek one versus the Israelite one, I don't think it matters as much as it's the same story, and it's clearly God's revelation permeating through the human consciousness. And clearly God's plan was always, it's not like he changed his mind and said, you know what, I'm going to open it up to everybody now, because, this is just not working out. He always knew salvation was for the world, was for every single human being who wanted it. He always knew this. This was always the plan. So it doesn't strike me as odd or strange that the revelation would still be found in all these other places and all these other cultures. I think that's testament to God's wisdom and magnificence. I don't see that as a conflict of interest. I see that as proof of what God has planned to do. So I
couldn't agree more. I think and by the way, this is straight out of Lumen Gentium. This is straightforward Catholic teaching, has been forever, really, but yeah. Consolidated at Vatican II, which is to say, because I think there's two things that are going on here. One is that people forget God is God.
Yeah.
So they think, it's as though they're so insecure that Jesus is God that they've got to defend him. God doesn't require defense. God is, it does not diminish God if not one human on earth doesn't believe in him. He's still God. So, and if God is God, look, I understand why this is difficult for people to accept, because actually it makes God's sacrifice all the more personal. Like, this is the God that is the essence of being, on whom all things are contingent, but he is not contingent. He is the uncreated creator. And therefore God is at work, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, whether we support it or not. And God's revelation cannot be hidden from the human soul. And so all human beings, wherever they are, however twisted they are, however wrong they may be, are inspired by this one same God. And that God is Jesus Christ, by the way. It's the Holy Trinity, God the Father, Son, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So that is an amazing truth. It's a very difficult one to accept, whilst also understanding that God died on a cross for you. I mean, it literally changes lives. It moves entire groups of people to tears, because that is the power of the gospel. That's the dynamos that St. Paul talks about. So we have to simultaneously recognize the enormity of God, and that God cannot be contained by any culture, by any individual person or group of human beings. So of course God is at work in the world. But there's also this sort of reflexive, again, post-Reformation way of thinking that our internal arguments about Christianity are the only thing that matters. And we get, again, what happens is a massive reduction of God's action in the world, and actually the unique place we've been called in it by God to witness to that. And so, we end up, the cliche is, you know, we end up arguing about how many angels you can fit on the head of a pin. Instead of recognizing God at work in the world, and if we think that God can't do anything without our amazing intellectual efforts, then we are committing the sin of idolatry. We're making ourselves God. That's the original sin. And so, you know, humility is the answer to this. Of course, God is at work in the world. Now, that also means that our job is to help to flesh that out and name it. But we're not doing that as some privileged people wagging our finger down at people saying, now listen here, you silly little Easterner, let me tell you the truth of Christianity. We're alongside them saying, we've been inspired by God too, and we've understood this revelation. And I believe, and we believe, that this is a better description of God's action in the world.
Yeah.
That's evangelism.
I think you mentioned the tears, right? I think, unfortunately, a lot of Christians, when they think of Christ or they go see Mel Gibson's Passion, you know, a lot of people have a hard time getting through it without tears, right? But I fear, from talking to them from time to time and asking questions, I always ask questions. I don't get into it. I don't try to belittle people, but I always like to know if my theories are right, and they usually are, about these kinds of things anyway. You know, why are you crying? You know, and when you really get into the conversation, it's about, oh, poor Jesus. Poor Jesus.
It's not crying for yourself.
Not poor Jesus. You should be crying for yourself. Yeah. You should be crying because your sins put him through that. Your sins put him there, not because he went through it. You shouldn't be crying for his sake. You should be crying for your own, because it shouldn't have even had to happen.
He's okay, guys.
Yeah, he's okay. You're not okay, but he's okay.
Yeah, it's actually a sentimental tear.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But it's amazing, isn't it? We have the Stations of the Cross, and there's that station, the women of Jerusalem, who are weeping over him, and he says, "Don't weep for me.
Weep for yourselves. Weep for yourselves." It's right in there. It's literally right in there, and people just gloss right over it. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because I wasn't even thinking on that wavelength, and it's so relevant. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, let's get to our next one. What's our next question?
All right, last question is, what is a doppelganger from a paranormal or metaphysical perspective?
Oh, well, you know.
We can share a story about that.
Oh,
can't we?
my goodness, yeah.
Well, the strict definition of a doppelganger would be, or at least my strict definition of it would be, any manifestation that presents as an exact copy of another individual. And this can have multiple different causations. There could be, it's a phenomenon that occurs. It's not a entity that does this. I think sometimes people get this impression that this is a doppelganger is like a species of incorporeal being or an elemental being that is called a doppelganger that has this ability. That's not what a doppelganger is. A doppelganger is a phenomenon. It's something that is applied to the experience of this type of thing happening. Lots of different things can cause this, and we can maybe get into some of the possibilities, but there's really a very large, a plethora of possibilities. But I can give you one from our own work, and you were there for that particular case. So many years ago, we took a case out on the other side of town here, in the Atlanta suburbs, and there was a family that was having a lot of difficulties and paranormal experiences and things going on in their house. This was a really big house. It was I guess what they call them, like a McMansion kind of thing.
Yeah, right? The house was huge.
Yeah, it was
beautiful.
It was huge.
Yeah.
And so it had a lot of different rooms, although I wouldn't say they were renting it, so it wasn't really well furnished. A lot of the rooms were kind of empty and sparse, but I don't know why they needed such a big place, but it was on a golf course, and it was a nice place. But in the lower level of the house, it was a 3-story home. In the lower level was an exercise room that was basically a windowless room that was 4 walls of mirrors. Now, as you probably know from talking with me on this show, or maybe just from following paranormal discussion, mirrors that face each other become amplifiers. You kind of see that when you hold a mirror in front of another mirror and you can kind of look into infinity. It kind of creates an infinity effect. I used to love it as a child. It would be fun. My mother had this
You're
little
fun at the fun house.
Yeah. But my mother had like this handheld mirror to check the back of her head.
Yes, my mom.
And I
probably
would
still has hers.
always like aim it at the
Yeah.
mirror and kind of like look into infinity. I always found that to be so interesting. And you can do this also with a video camera and get some really strange effects too. That if there's time later on, we can talk about it. But anyway, we were in that room because she reported to us, the client did, that was sort of the epicenter of the problems. And I was like, well, no
Very
surprise there.
spiritually charged room.
Yeah. So I said, well, it's empty. You don't have any exercise equipment in here. What happened? There was like a little cloth on the ground with a candle on it. I said, so what is going on here? And she goes, well, I use this room to meditate in. It's like, okay, well, that's probably half your problem right there. Not a good idea. All right. So yeah, I would stop that. But since she was under the impression that maybe she opened a portal or the mirrors opened a portal, and my feelings on portals, I don't like that terminology, but it's something that people will use. And so, what we were basically saying is that the activity and what I would describe a portal as, or what a portal really is a thinning of the veil between the incorporeal and the corporeal, which allows both sides to bleed into each other a little bit. It's not really a crossing through dimensions into a different world. It's not like that. It's not
like a hole in the fence.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And so that's possible that she could have weakened the veil in that one geographic location inside her house. So we concentrated our paranormal investigation in that room, of course. And so we turned off all the lights and we had all our cameras, and they were all aimed at me because I was the one asking the questions. I think we had an SB11 going, maybe an Ovilus 5 or something like that. I think we even had the do we have the ILS camera on there? I
don't think we had the SLS yet.
I mean, I'm sorry, the ILS.
Yeah,
SLS
I
camera.
don't think we had that one yet.
The SLS camera. No, I don't know if we had that or not. But anyway, we had a bunch of equipment. And the cameras that we had, which was a full spectrum and just a standard one in infrared, was directed at me. And while I was asking questions, trying to see if we could get voices to come through, to kind of get a feel or an idea as to what we might have been dealing with, one of the camera guys, which is a member of the team at the time, who's now deceased, by the way, so we've said prayers for him, had said, Bishop, and I said, and it's very rare for my team to interrupt me when I'm working. That doesn't happen unless there's a reason to interrupt me. And I mean, I'm very, like, by all means, interrupt me if there's something that's going on. I need to know everything. But I knew that the fact that I was being interrupted meant that something had to have happened or gone on. And so I stopped. I said, what is it? And he says, your reflection behind you in the mirror turned around and looked at all of us. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, think about it. If you're in a room of mirrors, right, and my back is to a mirror, then the reflection of the mirror behind me should be my back. It was my face. It was me. And then it scared the hell out of him enough that he left the room. He had to get out.
He actually came up to where me and his wife were in a upstairs bedroom doing a call and response, and he come up there. And this is not a weak man. He's actually pretty brave. He didn't scare easily.
No, he didn't. He was really.
He came up there and immediately asked for a cigarette from his wife with hands shaking, and he said something to the effect, "You ain't gonna believe." You ain't gonna believe the shit we just found downstairs. So immediately we all go running down there, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, it startled him quite a bit.
And I want to say that wasn't there some other thing where somebody saw me walking and I wasn't on that floor? Was it that
We
case
had
or was
that
it another
at
case?
Waverly, I think, wasn't it, where someone thought they saw you at the end of the hallway, but it wasn't
But I
you?
was like, I was not even
Yeah,
on
you weren't
that
even on that
floor, so
I
they
think
couldn't
it
have
was
been
Waverly.
me.
Don't quote me on that, but yeah, there was one case where that happened, and then we've heard your voice come through.
Well,
as
that's
well,
true.
too.
I mean, I've even said
even on Ghost
on
Adventures,
Ghost Adventures,
you had your name come through on the walkie, and
Yep.
we didn't have walkies.
Yeah. So these are all examples of doppelganger activity. And of course, the prevailing opinion of most people that are fear-based are going to say it's demons tricking you.
Not so much.
Not in my experience.
Yeah.
Just simply not in my experience. I want to say, now I'm going to get very metaphysical on this question because I really think the best answer is the metaphysical one, not theological or Christian worldview speculations, but what I have seen metaphysically to be the most reasonable explanation for this after studying it and realizing that these things don't have the characteristics of demonic activity at all. They are interesting. They can be frightening, but they are not evil. In my experience, I have not encountered any evil results from these things. What I would argue they are metaphysically, at least in most cases, or maybe let's not say that. Maybe that's too general. Let's just say in many cases, that it is the result of the multiple layers of self that are present at any given time, that when we engage in activities of a spiritual or supernatural nature, can change and interact with that activity in ways that are unexpected, things that we would not really typically ever encounter because most of our day-to-day activities are not all that interesting, right? Going to your job, coming home and cooking dinner, or going out to eat or something, reading a story to your kids before bedtime, having a drink and watching TV. These are not things that are going to provoke a spiritual reaction, not usually. But when you go into a paranormal environment, one that is already known to be charged, and you're trying to interact with that energy, then the various aspects of our nature change. And this is where I think people can get into trouble with paranormal investigating. Because when you don't know how to deal with all of the multiple layers of self that we create around the outer layer of what I guess ultimately the church would call the psyche, let's not forget for a minute that the psyche is not one thing any more than your body or soma is one thing. I mean, you think of yourself as one entity. You're not. You are the construct of billions of individual entities that are the cells that make up your body. And each one of those cells is its own entity. And when they come together, that forms you. So even scientifically, biologically, materialistically, you are not one thing. You are countless things. And the ethereal side, the more spiritual, incorporeal part of our nature is even more strange than that. And I think it can bend and break and twist. I think it's very closely related to, and this is church documented stuff, so this is not like not too esoteric for the Christian church to understand. I think it's exactly related to bilocation. There are saints that are known to have bilocated, been able to perform sacraments, heard confessions, and went to the deathbed and performed last rites across two different parts of the world. And they were there at the same time. There's reports of this. Okay? That's a doppelganger effect. It's something we're able to do because, again, as I've tried to teach my students and hopefully my audience here, we from time to time, time and space are not what we think it is. And neither is self what we think it is. We are a lot greater than what we even could about to imagine. And if you want to compare that to God, there is no comparison. So as strange as we are, and as much as we are a combination of multiple countless things, God is even beyond that at a macrocosmic level that is beyond comprehension. So that's what doppelganger activity generally is just parts of your nature revealing itself in ways that are unexpected, not demons pretending to be something else. Okay, we're going to take our break here. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the Independent Sacramental Movement, independent churches, independent Catholicism, and how it applies to the Church of Rome. Don't go away.
to keep pushing my limits and all the drive that I have. Well, I'm going the distance with you. I didn't know what I had till I knew what was missing and everything I'll keep you off the ground. You were gone, I wish you'd stay. I could look at you for days. Time was well spent, that's when I knew that I need to spend my life here with you. Take your time, not in the fast lane. I understand that you've been broken too many times, but I'll be waiting to make your moves from all you've taken. But if we listen to each other and admit our mistakes, then I can show you who I am, because I'm not the same. I'm better with you.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second hour of Vestiges After Dark. Okay, tonight's topic is Rome and the Independent Sacramental Movement. I'm going to take you through its history and some thoughts. We'll see how far we can go with it. I may be able to get done sooner than the full segment so we can get into the discussion, because that's where the real interesting stuff happens. But you need the prerequisite knowledge, and I'm going to share that with you in just a moment. Don't go away. Okay, so I mean, this episode could easily turn into like a bitch fest. I don't want that to happen.
It's okay.
You know, I am, and I think you're going to see this through the course of this show tonight, is that I am not trying to be at odds with the Church of Rome. How they handle me is their own problem, but that's not my motivation. This church and its mission has always been about Christian unity and solidarity with the reality of what the church was instituted to be. And so I think that needs to be sort of the foundation to what we build here in terms of the castle of understanding that hopefully we will construct by the end of this. So what is the Independent Sacramental Movement, or for short, the ISM? You might hear me refer to it that way. The question we need to answer here, some of them we need to answer, and hopefully we'll get through these all, make sure that I do, is what is the ISM first, okay? Are these churches, quote unquote, fake? Is that the correct term here? Are they valid? Are they schismatic? All right. If they are schismatic, how do they come home? Because see, the problem is there is nothing useful to the church saying something is schismatic if they don't offer a way to fix that schism, right? And they've more than abundantly done that with orthodoxy over the last 1,000 years. It hasn't worked, but I mean, you know, there's a path for orthodoxy to come back home if they wanted to. They would say, well, there's a path for you to come back home. That's why they're still at odds with each other, because both don't really want to admit that the other one is the one that's missing. But I come on orthodoxy side here, but that's another story. We'll get to it in a minute. So that's what we need to ask, okay? And in order to understand that, we need to answer what we mean semantically by these words, okay? So the word valid, what do we mean by, is this a valid church, okay? When we use the word valid, and we're not talking about the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church, we're not talking about the panel of Vestiges After Dark, we're talking about the Catholic Church as a whole, including the Church of Rome, the Vatican, everything that, you know, is Catholic. The word valid means that a sacrament truly occurs. So if we're going to say something's valid, is a church valid? Well, that means that their sacraments truly occur. If the Church of Rome says, yes, that's a valid church, that means they're saying those sacraments that they perform or confer, whatever, however you want to term it, actually happens. Okay? But then there's another word, and this word's a little bit dirtier than valid. It's that licit. So if we say, is the church licit? Are these clergy licit? Then that means that the sacraments that they perform, are they lawfully celebrated under the canons of the church? That's where things get sketchy, okay? Then there's another term that we need to learn here, valid but illicit.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where most independent sacramental churches will find themselves, where their sacraments do truly occur, but they are not licit. They're not lawfully celebrated under the canons of the Church of Rome. Actually, I would argue that the Orthodox churches are an example of this, even though Rome would say, no, that's a historical church. So they don't really see Orthodoxy as being illicit. They don't. They should. By their own definitions, they should, but they don't. There's special privileges given to the Orthodox churches, and that's fine. We're going to talk about how this creates a lot of confusion. But valid but illicit means that there's a real sacrament. It's just unlawfully celebrated. Now, let's look at some examples. You already have heard this one. This is a big one, the SSPX, right? The Society of St. Pius X. Recently declared schismatic, excommunicated by the canons of the church. And this occurred not because of their ultra-conservative theology, not because, they're an independent church. They don't see themselves as an independent church. They did this, they received this designation because they needed some new bishops. Their current ones are getting a little old, and Rome would not authorize new bishops to be consecrated. And so they went ahead and did it anyway. That's usually how most of these churches start.
Hold my beer.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's how they all end up this way. That's how you end up schismatic, is that you just, you start ordaining, consecrating bishops without Rome's permission. Under the canons of the Church of Rome, only the Pope can give that authorization. Well, the SSPX did it without Rome's authorization. So what does that mean? It means that those bishops that were consecrated are actually valid bishops, but they are illicitly celebrating the sacraments that even the very act of holy orders in that case was valid but illicit, okay? Because it wasn't lawful. It was valid. It was the right thing. It was a real sacrament. It really occurred. These are real bishops now, but they're not supposed to be exercising that office because they were not really given permission by the Vatican to do so. So where does the Independent Sacramental Movement come from? Because you might say, well, you're a bishop in the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church. You just created your own church. You made it up. No, I didn't. I had nothing to, well, I'm not going to say I had nothing to do with it, but it was not my idea. And it was not something that I even wanted. Okay, it's something that was entrusted to me. I received in good faith. It turns out, maybe if we have time, we'll get to it. I was very much betrayed by a lot of the people that were involved with this process. And it left a lot of hard feelings with people I respected. It created a lot of problems for me. But because I take my vows seriously, and the oath that I took at my consecration is one that I will not violate. And, I'm a man of integrity besides. Even outside of, I don't need to have fear of God to do the right thing. I don't need a moral compass to do the right thing. I do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. If it makes God happy along the way, well, great. If it makes me a better Christian along the way, great. But I'm not motivated by Christian morality. I'm motivated because the right thing to do is the right thing to do. And in this context, the right thing to do was to maintain my vows, despite the fact that it was basically a death sentence to ever having a normal life again. And to this day, no normal life. I don't have one. Never will. Because I stood true to the vows I took at the betrayal of many people. We'll get into that, but this is a common story with the ISM, and you'll see why some of the criticism that Rome does give us is not terribly wrong. Okay? Where did it come from, though? Where did this start? It wasn't Orthodoxy, although that was like really truly the first big schism. There had been other ones, heresies that broke off and stuff like that, Nestorians, and even in the very early days, you had Marcionites and Ebionites, and there was always Christian schisms and everything else. But the big one was Orthodoxy, the Great Schism, 1054. But that's not where this comes from. That's not where the ISM comes from. The ISM comes from actually the earliest key date to remember is 1723, and that was at Utrecht. Okay, Rome refused, very similar to what we're seeing now with the SSPX. Rome refused to recognize the election of Cornelius Stenoven, the Archbishop of Utrecht. All right, he is consecrated. He was consecrated without papal approval, and that occurred by Bishop Dominique Marie Ouellette, I believe. That's a Dutch name, right? It's Ouellette.
Ouellette, I believe.
Yeah. So you pronounce the T. Like a lot of people don't know. The Champagne. We've talked about this before.
The Moet and the Moet.
They say Moet or Moet. And if you say Moet, which is the actual correct pronunciation, because it's actually a Dutch name, not a French name, and they pronounce the T's, the people will correct you. Oh, you mean Moet? No, I mean Moet. But they think you're the heathen for saying the T because they think, oh, it's French Champagne. It must be Moet. That's not as much as an issue outside of the United States, but here in the U.S., it's a thing that you have to contend with. So I believe it's Varlet. Sorry, Varlet, not Varlet. This preserves, of course, the episcopal line outside of communion with Rome. Because remember what we said earlier, that you can have a valid sacrament but not have illicit sacrament. And just because something's illicit doesn't make it invalid. So while the Pope can say, no, you can't consecrate this bishop, if he gets consecrated without that permission, he's still a valid bishop. Okay? That's tough for people, even within the ranks of the church, to accept, but it's the truth. It's the way it works. That's how canon law is written, and the Church of Rome cannot argue that point. It's their own canons. Okay? They don't like it. They should change it, but I don't think they can change it because it's sacramental theology, and this is just the way it works. Okay? While the Pope might see himself as having the authority to control all of the sacraments, Holy Orders being the primary one in this case, other churches would disagree. And they do. So that election of the Archbishop of Utrecht back in 1723 was not authorized by the Pope, and therefore it became an episcopal lineage that was valid but illicit. Then fast forward through the rest of the remaining years of the 18th century, and the Church of Utrecht under this bishop continued independently. Catholic Church. This was a Catholic diocese, okay? Archdiocese. And it continued on without papal governance. Then disputes, of course, revolved around things like the usual, the same thing the Orthodox have, papal authority, local governance, and then the influence of Jansenism. But, I mean, we're not going to get into all the heresies and everything else. This was just other things that were going on. It'd be too complicated. This would be several episodes long, and I don't want this to be a really long one. I want to just kind of give you the basis. So Rome considered, long story short, Rome considers the hierarchy illicit of this lineage, but the apostolic succession continues because they are bishops, even though they're not under the authority of Rome and they're not seeking the Vatican's permission or the Pope's permission, they are still observing apostolic succession correctly. They're still performing valid rites, and these are valid bishops doing it. Okay, so illicit doesn't change the validity. That's essential to understand when you're talking about the ISM, because if you're wondering, how can I possibly be a real bishop? How can the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church be a real church? How could it possibly be? This is how it can possibly be. This is how it is, because it doesn't need the Pope's authority or permission or endorsement to be valid. And for churches like ours and churches like Orthodox churches, we're not really seeking validity, or rather legality under canon law. Those are Rome's canons. They're not ours. All that we care about is apostolic validity, which we have. We don't need the Pope for that. Okay? This is Rome's own canon. You don't believe me? Go look it up. All right? Now, fast forward to Vatican I, the First Vatican Council, 1869 to 1870, I believe. The First Vatican Council defined papal primacy as well as papal infallibility. This is where these dogmas came from. Okay? Some Catholics, particularly in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and the Netherlands, rejected these new dogmatic definitions. Not because they reject Catholicism, but they didn't believe that these definitions were representative of the faith that had existed up to that point in the undivided Catholic Church. They saw these definitions as a departure from that original intention. And so this created what is then now called, and has been ever since, the Old Catholic movement. All right. And then from that, very soon after, just about 20 years, 19 years, the Union of Utrecht occurred, where several old Catholic churches formally united under the Declaration of Utrecht, okay, where all this schism started. And their goals were to preserve apostolic succession, because that you need that for validity. You don't need papal permission, but you do need that to preserve Catholic sacramental life. So valid Catholic sacraments, so Catholic sacramental theology had to be preserved, but they still rejected the new papal dogmas of Vatican I, and they maintain what they viewed as the faith of the first millennium. So they saw themselves as being truer to the original intention of the church. That's what Orthodoxy claims. That's what the old Catholics claim. And that's what the SSPX now claims. Instead of Vatican I, now they have a problem with Vatican II. They don't like Vatican II. Vatican II, too much of a departure from what came before. Well, the same old argument happened before. The SSPX is going to become the new old Catholics. You watch. All right. This is the beginning of the story, all right? And long before there were dozens or even hundreds of independent Catholic jurisdictions, there was Utrecht, okay? And whether one agrees with their perspective of theology or not, the historic old Catholic bishops preserved apostolic succession. Rome does not deny this, by the way, to my knowledge. This preservation occurred outside of the communion with Rome. And so from that single historical stream of bishops, many later independent sacramental churches eventually came about and can trace their origin back to that point. We are one of those churches that do. Okay? So that's what a true independent sacramental church is. And because this is recognized by the old Catholic Church, we are in communion with the old Catholic Church. And that gives us at least some fellowship and unity within our ministry. Even if Rome doesn't want us, well, the old Catholics did. This gave birth to the Independent Sacramental Movement, okay? And it doesn't begin with one denomination of independent churches. It's more like, you could say, a family tree that begins in the late 19th century and then continues especially through the 20th. There were bishops who possessed, or in some cases claimed to possess, valid apostolic succession, and began founding independent Catholic jurisdictions outside both Rome and Eastern Orthodoxy. I say claim because the problem here is that there are, unfortunately now, and this is where Rome has an absolute point, okay, and why they are suspicious of independent churches like ours. There are ISM churches that believe and claim that they have apostolic succession, but valid rites were not used. So they are not valid bishops, but because it was a valid bishop that performed this invalid rite, that was also, by the way, illicit, then now these new bishops are not valid or licit. And that overcomplicates the problem. Now it becomes this compounding effect. Now, how do you investigate all these branches? Were the right rites performed? Is the bishop that did it even a valid bishop himself? We don't know in some cases. And the only people that are really observing this stuff are usually the people that are part of that one church, because they're usually too small for anybody else to care. Okay? Some remain very traditional, like the old Catholics, all right? But others became liberal Catholics, old Roman Catholics, Celtic Catholic Church, ecumenical Catholic Church, the independent Orthodox Church, the esoteric sacramental churches like ours. Even though we are in communion with the old Catholics, we are not an old Catholic church, which is in communion with them. We are an independent, esoteric Catholic church, as we talked about an episode or two ago. Many bishops accumulated multiple lines of succession because of this. So that's what's interesting also, is that when you look at a lot of these validly consecrated independent bishops that receive their orders through old Catholic lines, you'll find that there's a lot that go back to the Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, the Oriental Orthodox, and then even later independent bishops. I have personally 21 lines of apostolic succession, 2 lines which go through the Roman Catholic Church, the Church of Rome, a few that go through Orthodoxy, some that go through the Anglican Church, I've got an Anglican line, some that go through independent Old Catholic. And you can look them up go to esotericcatholic.org, and they should all be there. If you can't find them, let me know, and I'll see why. But they're all up there. I've always had them published since the day I was consecrated. We made that a point to make sure that it was, so no one could question it, because it's important. And you can find in every line of apostolic succession, it always comes back to a Roman Catholic bishop, except for the Orthodox lines. All right. So today, the Independent Sacramental Movement includes hundreds and even perhaps thousands of small jurisdictions worldwide. There's no central authority for any of them, and every church is effectively responsible for itself. We call that autocephalous. Now, they don't like when we say that word, because it sounds like, oh, you're claiming a type of validity that you don't really have. No, we have it. You just don't want to recognize it because it's not in your best interest to do so. We'll get to that. So this is why people often misunderstand the Independent Sacramental Movement. It isn't one church, okay? It isn't one denomination of Catholicism. It isn't even one theology. And that becomes problematic too, because there are heresies in the ISM. Yeah. You see that a lot with the Gnostic Catholic churches that have apostolic succession, where they start becoming something else, okay? And the only thing most of these churches have in common is that they claim apostolic succession and continue celebrating the historic sacraments outside the major communions. That's the only thing they have in common. So what is Rome's position on all these churches? Well, Rome recognizes that some of these successions may in fact be valid, because validity does not depend on the Pope or his endorsement. It depends on, were the sacraments performed with matter, form, and intent? Correct matter, correct form, correct intent? Was the minister of the sacrament a valid minister? And was the recipient able to receive it validly? What do I mean by that? Well, let's say a valid bishop were to confer holy orders on a female. Now, there are churches that say, oh, she's a bishop now, and she's one of our bishops. You'll see that, I think, the liberal Catholic Church. Well, maybe not the liberal Catholic Church. Well, the Anglicans did it, right? And that's not a valid recipient by the sacramental theology. So what that ends up becoming is, now you have a bishop that's claiming apostolic succession who's not validly consecrated, okay? So there's no blanket recognition by the Church of Rome. There's too many of them to do it, and then there's no blanket rejection as the result of it. Not typically. Not unless one were to get so big where now they have to contend with it. Churches that are in the ISM are typically very small. Most of them, I'm going to be very general now, and this might be a wrong thing to say, but I'm going to say it. Most of them are churches of one. Just that bishop that wanted apostolic succession, wanted orders, found some guy, some schmuck who was willing to give it to him. And now they're like, oh, look at me, I'm a bishop. We call that vanity ordination. And it's a big problem in the ISM.
It's been a big problem with us. People sending new emails wanting you to ordain them and keep it moving. It's like, that's not how it works.
That's not how it works. So this is where people get confused, because valid is not the equivalent of Catholic, okay? It's not the equivalent of being in communion with Catholicism, in communion with the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and jurisdiction is different than validity, and permission's different than all of it. Rome recognizes this with Orthodoxy and the Oriental Orthodox. Okay, so this is what's interesting, is that they get a special dispensation. They don't have a problem. Like, when Orthodox bishops don't seek the Pope's permission to consecrate new bishops. The patriarchs of Constantinople, all the patriarchs of all the Eastern churches do not go to Rome and say, is it okay if I do this? No, they just do it. And you know what? Rome does not stop them and does not declare that these people are excommunicated or in heresy or anything else. In fact, they will say that it's perfect. I mean, I don't know if they use the word licit, but they might as well. But ISM churches aren't so lucky. And why? It all comes down to the numbers. It comes down to historical connection, but in reality, it comes down to the numbers. There are billions probably of I don't know the exact number of Orthodox Christians, but there's a large number of them. You know, how many Nicolaitans Catholics are there? Maybe 300 if we're really being liberal with our count. Maybe about 300 people could say that they're Nicolaitans Catholic. In fact, I would say probably that's probably too high.
That's worldwide.
And that's worldwide.
Yeah.
And I think it's still too high because I think a lot of our members who are supporting members of this church, if you were to ask them, well, what are you? They'd just say they're Roman Catholic, but they prefer, you know, the fellowship with us, which Rome would have a problem with if they knew this. But, you know, this becomes very complicated, as you'll see here. Rome's canonical framework is based upon how they teach how this works. Okay, so let's use the Holy Nicolaitans Catholic Church as the example because that's the relevant one. All right, so how does Rome recognize us? All right, how does Rome determine whether any sacrament outside her visible communion is valid? Well, Rome answers that question through theology and canon law. So let's look at that. Hopefully I got these right. I'm sure Father Chris, when he comes back here on the third hour, will correct me if I'm wrong. Canon 1008. Holy orders configures a man permanently to Christ through an indelible character. So it's one of the sacraments that has the indelible mark, like baptism does. Okay, like confirmation. You only receive these sacraments once. Now, holy orders is a little bit strange because you have levels of it. All right, deacon, priest, and bishop. But it's not like you're receiving a new sacrament. It's just the continuation of it, okay? It gives an indelible mark. So once a priest, always a priest. Once a bishop, always a bishop. You can't just be like, I don't want to do it anymore. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I really don't want to do this anymore. And it's like, I can't walk away from it. The indelible mark, it's there forever. I can go and pretend that it's not there, but it doesn't change anything, okay? Ordination is not something that can be undone. And this is part of Canon 1008. Canon 290. Holy orders cannot be repeated or lost. All right. So once a sacred ordination is validly received, and that's important, validly received, it can never become invalid. The priest could be laicized. The bishop could be excommunicated. They may lose the faculties to operate as a pastor. But if the ordination was valid, he remains forever ontologically a bishop. That can never change. Okay? Which is why it's a problem when, you know, you hear these scandals, you know, the bishop molesting kids or something, and he gets, what do they do with him, right? I mean, they send him away to some monastery. Probably they should send him to some jail, but he's not allowed to practice anymore. He's not allowed to run a diocese anymore.
Defrock him.
They defrock. Well, they do, but they send him usually to a monastery to live out his life quietly in prayer and hope that he can save his
The frozen
soul.
tundra of Siberia.
Yeah. I mean, that might be too good for some of them, but you know, he's still a bishop no matter what he does, no matter what happens. I mean, we're all sinners, but you know, there's certain sins that you just can't commit as a bishop. And, you know, that would definitely be one of them. Canon 1012, the minister of sacred ordination is consecrated a bishop. So that's the only minister that can perform a consecration is a bishop themselves, okay? Usually it's 3 bishops that will lay hands on, but one performs the ceremony. And only a bishop can do ordination. Only a bishop can confer holy orders. A priest can't, a deacon can't. All right? Rome does not say in this canon, keep very close eye on this if you read it for yourself. Rome does not say a bishop in communion with Rome. The canon states that the minister has to be a consecrated bishop. The end, period. All right? That distinction is important for independent churches. Canon 1013, a bishop must not consecrate another bishop without a papal mandate. Okay? That's where we start getting into, okay, why are we having problems? Well, that's why. Because I can tell you right now, my bishop did not ask who it would have been Pope Benedict. He did not ask Pope Benedict if he could consecrate me. All right. The church needed a bishop. I was elected and elevated to that office. The Pope was not involved. So that violates Canon 1013. That is schismatic. And let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'll get to that in a minute. Canon 1387, a bishop who consecrates another bishop without papal approval and the bishop receiving consecration incur canonical penalties, which means my bishop and me both received, in theory, canonical penalties for this action. But something's important about that. Rome doesn't punish the act. It does not declare the sacrament invalid. Okay? It's valid, but illicit. So is the Nicolaitans Catholic Church a real church? Yeah, valid but illicit. Is Bishop Bryan a real bishop? Yeah, valid but illicit. Okay? Vatican II declared, the Council of Vatican II declared that the Eastern churches were separated from Rome. The Eastern churches that were separated from Rome, because there are Eastern churches that are actually, they're called uniates by the Orthodox. It's kind of an insult, but there are Eastern churches that came back to communion. But the ones that didn't, the Orthodox churches, are Vatican II declared that they possess true sacraments. And that's because they retained apostolic succession, valid priesthood, and Eucharist. The visible communion with Rome is not by itself what makes a sacrament valid. So by virtue of Vatican II, if we are to say, and the church does, that Vatican II was a valid council, ecumenical council, then guess what? They declared that the Orthodox orders are valid. Okay? They don't declare them licit, but they declare them valid, which means that you don't need to be in communion with the Church of Rome to be valid. That proves it. Vatican II proves it. Then there is communionist notio. I think is how you say that. I'm so terrible with pronouncing it. Communios notio. Okay. 1992. This was a document 1992. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith explains that churches possessing apostolic succession, a valid episcopate, and a valid Eucharist remain true particular churches, even though full communion with Rome is lacking. All right? Listen to that. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in the Roman Catholic Church declared that apostolic succession, a valid episcopate, and a valid Eucharist remain true even if they don't have full communion with Rome. This document is speaking specifically to the Eastern churches, though. But so they're not extending it to us in the ISM, but that's kind of selective, a little convenient, because in reality, we should fall into the same category. They just don't care enough about us to make that declaration. We're not important enough to them. But Orthodoxy is. So how would Rome evaluate an independent church? Well, they'd ask if the bishop was validly consecrated, was proper matter used, proper form. We've talked about this. Did the minister intend to do what the church does? That's a necessary part of the intent. And was the recipient capable of receiving holy orders? We've kind of covered all that. If those conditions are met, Rome has theological grounds to recognize the sacrament as valid, even if judging it illicit or schismatic. Okay? Applying this to the Holy Nicolaitans Catholic Church now, this is where we need to be careful. And this is where it becomes, again, a problematic issue. Rome has never publicly evaluated us. They've never publicly evaluated my episcopal lineage, to my knowledge. Therefore, we cannot honestly say that Rome recognizes my orders. But we can't say that they've declared them invalid either, because they've just never made a declaration. They've never cared to. the correct way of looking at this is that according to Roman Catholic theology, the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church would be evaluated using the same sacramental principles applied to any independent jurisdiction. And they would look at apostolic succession, valid matter, form, proper intent, and a validly consecrated bishop. And if they did all those things, they'd find that all of it is valid. If the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church's episcopal lineage and sacramental practices satisfy that criteria, then the question becomes not so much a question of validity. It becomes whether or not this was a licit action and whether or not there's a violation of the communion with the church, which obviously there is because no permission was sought, right? We publicly state that we have apostolic succession. I've already told you that. You can go look it up yourself. We have a historic Catholic sacramental theology. We use valid rites. We use whatever the Church of Rome uses is what we use. We've even used Orthodox rites as well in our distant past. Communion with the old Catholic jurisdiction is something that we have, okay? And the old Catholic jurisdiction is recognized by Rome because it's big enough for them to do so. That doesn't automatically extend to us, but it is something to consider here. And then the episcopal succession through Duarte Costa and the historic Rabiba line is something that is in my apostolic succession. And these are valid episcopal consecrations, okay? So those lineages are valid, whether they like it or not. It is. A lot of Roman Catholic priests with those same lines. And why does this matter is because it isn't about proving whether or not we're right or wrong as an independent church. It's about understanding how Rome thinks about us. Because Rome makes distinctions between things like validity, jurisdiction, those kinds of things, okay? Rome does not ask, are they Roman Catholic? They're not going to look at us and be like, are these guys Roman Catholic? They're going to ask, did a sacrament actually occur? And only after answering that question would it then ask, was it lawful? Okay? Whether the minister had jurisdiction to do so and whether the church is in full communion. So clearly we don't meet the last two, or the last three. We were not lawful. We're not, the minister, I do not have jurisdiction under the Pope. And we're not in full communion with the Church of Rome. But we are valid. Guess who also isn't lawful in jurisdiction and communion? Every Orthodox church. So the question is really not so much about validity or if we're a real church or if I'm a real bishop. The question is, are we schismatic? Okay. So what does that look like? All right. Well, we can look at the SSPX. And I don't want to get into this because it's very long. But they wanted to preserve the Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass. They feel that anything that is post-Vatican II changed the structure of the intent of the church. And so they are a ultra-conservative, pre-Vatican II kind of Catholic system that has had a struggle with the Church of Rome for a while now. In 2009, the remission of the bishop's excommunications that occurred earlier did not restore full canonical status to them, but it was rescinded. The major rupture was in 1988 when, again, their archbishop consecrated 4 bishops without papal approval. So they've done it before back in the 80s, and now they've done it again in 2026. And Pope Leo was having none of it. So he declared them schismatic and excommunicated. And this is important to mention because we're probably I don't want to say liberal, but we're more of a, I guess compared to the SSPX, we're very liberal.
Yeah.
We're more the liberal version of them, and Rome doesn't like either one. Okay. But this is the problem, okay? You're going to declare excommunications, all right? They could do that to us if they evaluated us because they could say it's schismatic. I was baptized a Roman Catholic, all right? So from the way they see it, I broke with my Roman Catholic heritage to go and do this. So they could say that, well, you're a schismatic person, so your whole church is schismatic, and you're not in communion with us, and you've got no permission to do anything, so we don't recognize your jurisdiction. Great, fine, okay, who cares, right? Well, this is why it matters, though. Because if you're going to excommunicate, you're not doing that. People think, oh, it means to kick them out of the church, kick people out of the church. It's not to kick people out of the church. That's at least not what it's supposed to be about. Excommunication is supposed to make people feel lost so that they seek reconciliation. And the church's obligation in that is to give a path to do so. All right? With the independent Catholic churches, Rome has no dialogue with us. They offer nothing. No commission, no roadmap to reconciliation, no visible process to doing so. The only thing they would say, if I were to go to them, go to confession, renounce your ministry, dissolve your church, give all of its assets to charity, probably theirs, okay, and you live as a layperson from now on, here on out. That would be my penance. They would want me to renounce everything that God asked me to do, because they don't recognize that conversation with God occurred. They don't recognize that vocation, well, they did at one time, because I was a Roman Catholic seminarian, so they clearly knew I had a real vocation. But they don't recognize the direction the vocation went. They didn't recognize my discernment in that process, and they would not recognize that God put me in this mess. I didn't ask for it. All right? Excommunication is supposed to be medicinal, but medicine is supposed to heal. They offer no treatment, no solution. The church gives us no means to fix this so-called schism. So, and the only way they would recognize it is not by the institution of this church, but by the individuals that participate in it. So I'd have to go to confession and renounce everything I've done. My wife Tracy would have to do the same. You'd be okay because you weren't baptized Roman Catholic.
No.
So all you would need to do is go to confession and be like, "Oh, I was in a schismatic church, but I'm coming back home." It'd be easy for you.
I'm a rebel.
Yeah, it'd be easy for you. It'd be easy for Father Chris, because I believe he wasn't baptized Roman Catholic. We will talk about that too. But for Tracy and I, we were. Well, she wasn't Roman Catholic. She was baptized Ruthenian Catholic, but it was still under the communion. So we don't have really any path to fix this. Rome doesn't reach out to us. It doesn't seek dialogue. It doesn't identify whatever the doctrinal obstacles are. It doesn't propose any kind of reconciliation. So if they were to actually excommunicate me formally, what would that even attempt to achieve? Because there would be no means to fix the problem. They offer nothing. And they will say, oh, this is all about the unity of the church and you're violating that unity. But it's like, okay, let's assume you're right with this. Pope Leo, let's say you're right. Then what's your solution? What's your solution? I'm supposed to just throw away my entire life, everything I've built and worked for, all the people that I've served, just goodbye, see you later. Unity at what cost is my question, okay? And that's where we come to the end of this sort of discussion. Almost the end of the segment. So let me give you some closing thoughts. The Holy Nicolean Catholic Church's formal position has always been, it's even on our website, it's been there since day one, okay? Has always been, we are always open to coming back to Rome, to reconciling with them, to being welcomed into the communion. But for us, we don't see the conflict. From our vantage point, there's nothing that Rome intrinsically teaches that is such a barrier that we couldn't come back. The only thing that keeps us from being in communion is the fact that they don't care enough about us to seek it. And they want us to seek it individually, which I can't do. We're an institution now. If they were willing to have a dialogue about how to fix that as an institution to institution, then we'd be open for that conversation. Hell, I would kill to be able to have some clergy to help me. I mean, this is the worst part about being, we haven't even talked about all the other aspects of it. Like, I think they think it's like some kind of glorious thing. It's like, oh, I get to call myself a priest and I didn't have to work for it or something. I mean, do you really think that? You can, most of you out there cannot even begin to imagine the absolute horror of trying to run this church the way I have to. Because see, I'm a strong believer that, well, look, outside of the theological definitions of what a church is, the reality is churches are still businesses. And as a businessman, because I have to run a business to be able to put food on my table, because the church doesn't, okay? It helps, but it doesn't do what I need to do to survive. It just gives help. It makes it a little easier for me to be able to do my work, but it doesn't pay what I need to run a family and create a future and build a normal life, okay? So in that sense, a business needs to be viable. A business, in order to be in business, you have to prove that you've got a viable business plan. With the exception of a handful, I have never encountered a ISM church that is viable. Almost all of them are paid for out of pocket by the people who run it. In other words, instead of the church paying them as they should get paid, because it's a job, it's work, it's a career, they end up having to pay for it to keep it going. That was my story for a very long time. Can't even tell you how costly that was. Okay, so, and even this church, you would say, well, you're pretty healthy, it's only because I'm willing to do it. Why don't I have a staff? You know why? Because this church is not viable. You know why? Because it doesn't have the money to pay anybody. And nobody in their right mind would want to take a job where they don't get paid. Would you? Would you want to work for IBM? And they're like, no, you what's your salary? No salary. No salary. You just work 60 hours a week for nothing. Maybe we'll give you like a little bit of something. Maybe, a few things here and there. But that's it.
We'll have a pizza party on Friday.
Yeah, we'll have a pizza party. Maybe a bottle of liquor every now and then. Yeah. I mean, that's what it's like, okay? And I can't even tell you just how hard that is to try to maintain your sanity when you've got a wife that you got to, care for, a child you got to care for, a household you got to run, all right? And then have to do secular work in order to make it work, and then still do everything that a minister requires. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. And that's yet a lot of, again, most of the ISM churches, they get away with it by not doing anything. A lot of these independent sacramental churches do nothing. You got this guy that sits in his living room and offers the mass. Sometimes they'll put themselves on Facebook doing it. That's it. That's their ministry. That's their church. That's not this one. This one's very active. Okay, but it's active because those of us who are a part of it are willing to sacrifice everything to keep it healthy. And I think rather than Rome criticizing us for that, maybe they should award us a medal. We'll be back after this.
Gloria in excelsis Deo, et in terra pax hominibus bone voluntatis, Laudamus Te, benedicimus Te, adoramus Te, glorificamus Te. Gratias agimus Tibi propter magnam, gloriam Tuam. Domine Deus, Rex Celestis, Deus Pater omnipotens, Domine Filii unigenite, Iesu Christe, Domine Deus, Agnus Dei, Filius Patris, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis, qui tollis peccata mundi, suscipe depreccationem nostram, qui sedes ad dexteram Patris, miserere nobis, quoniam tu solus sanctus, tu solus Dominus, tu solus altissimus, Iesu Christe, cum Sancto Spiritu, in gloria Dei Patris. Amen.
Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final hour of Vestiges After Dark. It's now time to digest the last hour and all the content there. I'm sure you might have some questions. If you do, you can call into the show, 207-544-1983. That's 207-544-1983. Or you can ask your questions in the chat rooms around the internet, be it Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram. Our panel is rejoining us, and they will also help facilitate some of the discussion here to unpack everything. And I want to apologize for my butchering of Latin. It's been a long time since I had to use it. We don't use Latin in the Nicolaean Catholic Church. We use the vernacular. Much to the dismay of the SSPX, I'm sure. Anyway, when we come back here, your questions and more discussion about Rome and the Independent Sacramental Movement. Don't go away. So hopefully, after hearing all that, now you understand where the ISM came from and why it happens. Should these churches exist? Well, maybe not, because like I said, most of them are not really financially viable businesses, and are not able to take care of themselves the way that they need to. Not even this church has the resources it needs to be able to do its mission correctly. It only has to pick and choose parts of its mission, and it's only ever been able to do that. I wouldn't say that's a viable business model. So maybe they shouldn't exist, but they need to exist. And there's a difference between something that shouldn't exist and something that needs to exist, because they fill the gap. They fill the gaps that the other larger institutions leave behind. And hopefully we have done that, because not only has this church been instrumental in bringing numerous people back to Christ that wouldn't even have darkened the doorstep of a Roman church, or even an Orthodox one for that matter. They came to us because we were approachable, and they found baptism through that. And then there's also all of the Roman Catholics that left the church, and they came to us to have dialogue, and all of a sudden now they're going back. Okay, we've done our part. We've done a lot of good, more than anybody could even imagine. So I understand that God had a mission here. He gave me the burden of it, and it does good. I don't like the schism any more than the Church of Rome does. But, the problem is it's an ideological divide, just like with Orthodoxy, that may be irreconcilable, because when you start introducing dogmatism, then you create barriers that become insurmountable. And that's what's happened here, because I'm sure even outside of all of the other things that they would find wrong with us, they could never accept me as a bishop in the Church of Rome, because I'm married now, and they can't have that. All right. So that would be a big issue. I'm sure probably one of the primary ones that would prevent that from ever happening, because they'll accept a married priest from another. Sometimes the Anglicans come in, but married bishop, no, I don't see that happening.
Well, they actually did famously receive an ICAB bishop, so the Duarte Costa schism, the Brazilian schism. a priest that he ordained, a bishop who was married and had 10 children, was he hadn't initially been a Catholic like me, so had not ever committed an act of schism himself, and so he was received into full communion with the See of Peter.
In Brazil, though, right?
As a bit, no, but as a bishop.
Yeah, but in Brazil.
And in fact, he took. Yes, but he took part in the Second Vatican Council.
Oh yeah, I mean, I understand that.
I mean, but he was never given his own see because he was married. But
right.
And there are apocryphal stories that he was received as a married bishop because they thought that he was very old and that, you know.
My understanding. I think I know who you're talking about.
In fact, he wasn't.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Famous case.
I think, though, if I remember correct, if it's who I'm thinking, I mean, he was more so, as far as his faculties were basically the same as what you would give a priest. He wasn't really given episcopal faculty.
But he was, as a bishop, present at Vatican II.
Well, because you can't remove, as we talked about, you can't remove the episcopacy from his indelible mark, but you can stop him from performing any actions as a bishop.
He was given a pontifical burial as well.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
But you're right. Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. In terms of his active ministry, it was obviously, you know, it was, he wasn't made a diocesan bishop, you know, but but it is the exception, though. I mean, you know, he's one of the exceptions.
Maybe one of the only ones.
but I think, like, I want to kind of go to a sort of a more fundamental sort of question here.
Okay.
So in terms of, I think you've done a very good job of saying, look, there's a difference between validity and licity, as the Roman Church describes it. So the Roman Catholic Church, you know, is open to recognizing the validity of sacraments all over the place. You know, licity is about, you know, their legal ordering of their church and how that's done, and that's a matter for them. So of course anyone that's outside of that is going to be illicit, whether you're Orthodox or ISM or whatever it may be. But I don't think we can afford to ignore what lies behind that licity. It's not as though the Roman Catholic Church one day just decided to think, oh, I know, how can we you know, legally complicate things and make sure we're in charge of everything. The origin of this, and again, this is to be generous, the origin of this is our Lord's commission to St. Peter. And so, you know, Simon, you are Peter the rock, on this rock I'll build my church. That's the foundational story of that. And by the way, the foundational story of all of our claims to apostolic succession, because St. Peter was ordained by Christ, you know, the Holy Spirit was imparted to him. So we know that the church is supposed to be one and supposed to be gathered around the successor of Peter. Now, that's not getting into all of the complications as to how we might, you know, the history and the theology of that claim. But I think it's, what I'm trying to say is there's a noble element to saying the church is not just about being valid, but about being gathered, and not just about having valid sacraments, but being part of the mission of the church. Now, the way that the Catholic Church has grown to understand that is that it's the bishops in communion with the successor of Peter. So that's pretty much what canon law says about licity, for example.
Right.
So but like I said, I want to go back to, there is a biblical warrant for this. Like I say, it's not just some cynical Roman bureaucracy that came up with this idea. You know, there is a biblical origin for this and a noble ideal. But it's also important to say that, and the Great Schism is a good example of this. First of all, the Great Schism is, you know, we say 1054. Well, actually, one could argue that the schism between Orthodoxy and the Western Church didn't really happen until the 18th century. I mean, there's, you know, we like to draw neat lines when we look back in time, but actually these things are not neat. We only ever know things in hindsight.
Yeah.
And so there's a world of difference, as we all know, between being in communion with the See of Peter for the first 1,000 years of the church, or even the first 1,500 until the printing press, really, because today we know, right? Today we've got the internet, and we've got, you know, we can research people, and AI can tell you about people. We know who's who, and, you know, I can tell you my apostolic line, you know, but before the printing press, how did we know who was in communion with the See of Peter and who wasn't? We didn't really, but one way was to say, well, we probably know that this regional bishop who's been sent to us by Rome, is likely to be in communion with St. Peter, with the successor of St. Peter. And so all I'm saying is that as our ability to spread out and to network and to be online and or even in books, as that developed, the chances of schism also increased, because you can get really into the weeds of, are you fully in communion with, or what do you think about Vatican I? What do you think about Vatican II? That's why it's no mistake that we have this explosion of valid but illicit churches. It's not that they didn't exist before. It's just that those distinctions weren't so easy to make, whereas now they are easy to make.
Yeah, that's true.
And I do want to get to something about, for our Roman Catholic friends who are nervous about this, about valid but illicit. I'll give an example. I'm going to read a canon from the Code of Canon Law, which tells you explicitly that they recognize the validity of sacraments outside of people who have a faculty from the Bishop of Rome. And it's this Canon 844, if you want to look it up. Communicatio in sacris. So under narrow specified circumstances, danger of death chief among them, a Catholic may, listen to this, licitly receive sacraments from a validly ordained non-Catholic minister.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they wouldn't have that canon if they didn't recognize that non-Catholic minister was in fact a validly ordained priest.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's make it very, very clear. And even says it's licit. Now, for example, if I go to my local Roman Catholic church here, the priest drops dead halfway through the canon, I am canonically obliged by the Catholic Church to continue that mass.
Sure.
Yeah.
If there's no other priest present, if there's no other licitly, faculty granted Catholic priest present, I am in fact obliged to continue that sacrament. If someone's dying in the street, I'm obliged to hear their confession or baptize them. So these are the instructions of the Roman Catholic Church in communion with St. Peter. So just to support what you said about valid but illicit, in fact, you can even become licit for in extremis under the canons of the Catholic Church. So
under certain circumstances.
Yeah. So there it is explicitly within their code that they recognize there are priests outside of full communion with the See of Peter. But having said all of those things, it's also true, when we say, why isn't Rome doing more to help us? Well, actually, if you look at recent history, the ordinariates were set up. Now, ostensibly, it was set up for Anglicans to become Catholics, but actually, Protestants from any other tradition come through the ordinariate as well. Former Baptist ministers are now Catholic priests, so in other words, I don't think it's fair to say that Rome is disinterested with gathering people back into unity.
Oh no, they're very interested in gathering people back. I don't think they're interested in these independent churches that are made up of like anywhere from 1 to maybe 200 people.
But what I'm saying is there is a mechanism for that. I mean, if we're concerned about unity, we can say, well, what am I doing to unify? And I put this on myself as I'm talking to myself, not to you.
Mm-hmm.
What am I doing to work towards full visible unity of the body of Christ, which is everybody's. Well, if it's not your aim, then you really are wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it is. I mean, if one is not aligned to that principle, then actually we're not operating towards God at all. So, because God doesn't have multiple churches, He has one church, and so, I challenge myself all the time on that. What am I doing?
I think
what invitations are being open to me?
I think
what
the
am
way
I doing to respond to that?
I think the way to answer that, honestly, because it's a good point you make, and it's certainly one that I think most sincere independent bishops have contended with. I know I have. And the way I approach it is to ask myself, well, outside of the fruits of what I do, okay? So I think the fruits have largely spoken for themselves. I I gather people that would never step in anywhere near a Catholic church. I bring them back to the sacraments, and then I send them back to the Catholic Church. I don't keep them for myself. I don't retain them. So people have come back to Catholicism because of this church here. So the fruits, I think that in itself speaks for itself. And in my sense, in my opinion, that is Catholic Christian unity. So I feel like I've done my part in that respect. Where it gets, I guess, more complicated is administratively. So when you bring up like the theology of, you are Peter upon the rock I shall build my church, we have to ask ourselves, is this a spiritual commission that Jesus is talking about, or is he giving Peter an administrative one? I think when you look at it from maybe the standpoint of Paul, I don't think he would have seen Peter as being someone that could supersede him or even should in anything that Paul set out to do. And I'm not sure Peter could have stopped him anyway. There was conflict even amongst themselves. So we know this. And at no point in Scripture anyway does Peter ever throw his weight around and say, well, you're being excommunicated. It seems to the Church of the East, okay, that Rome has over the centuries slowly taken more and more administrative liberty to the point of papal infallibility and what caused the old Catholic schism. So where I have to stop and say, well, what am I doing for unity? What am I doing? Well, I'm available, but from my standpoint, as I define Catholicism according to how I understand the apostles did, and they didn't use that word necessarily, but they understood the concept of Catholicity. We haven't left the church. Administratively, we do our own thing, but we haven't left the church. We don't violate apostolic succession. We don't violate sacramental theology. The only things that, and we've talked about them on the Esoteric Christianity show, the only things where we might differ doctrinally, I wouldn't even call it doctrinal, I would just say interpretation differences, which are non-dogmatic for us. So it's like if Rome were to say, well, you can come back, but you got to stop, you got to stop teaching this particular thing this way. Well, it's not a problem for me because it's not a dogmatic teaching anyway. It's just something that we feel is a better model to look at. But if Rome disagreed and that's what's standing between us and unity, I would be like, okay, well, then it goes.
Rome's particularly bad at stopping crazy priests talking crap within their own church.
I know, right? It's very true. Very true.
Look at some YouTube videos.
Even bishops, there are even bishops, have said some crazy shit, and Rome can't stop.
Look at the German bishops. Look at the German bishops. They're an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
But anyway, not all of them, but
some of them.
bishops' conferences.
No, I know.
And again, looking at the East, I think we have to be careful about terms here. The Eastern Orthodox schism goes back a long time, okay? And long gone are the days where we have a Latin patriarch of Antioch. That stopped in the 60s because there's an acknowledgement from Rome there that it's not as though in Moscow and Bucharest there were Western Catholic Latin Rite churches. There weren't. Okay. So in other words, there's a sort of a sense of the Great Schism dates back a long way, that valid succession and sacraments have been continually celebrated and handed on through the ages. That's a very different discussion for Rome than the Western Church, which essentially fragmented at the Reformation and has continued to because the only results of Protestantism is more Protestantism. So I think there is a different discussion to be had. Now, the SSPX recent ordinations are quite a good illustration of this. What is it that they weren't granted by the Pope? It was the mandate. Okay, so for those that don't know, before a bishop's consecrated in the Roman Catholic Church, a mandate is issued personally by the Holy Father. So every single bishop, whether it's a diocesan bishop, an auxiliary bishop, everyone that's consecrated in the Roman Catholic Church receives a mandate directly from the Pope. It's written in Latin and then translated into the vernacular of wherever they serve, and it's read out as part of the ordination rite. Do you have the mandate? SSPX kind of fudged this by making their own little bit of paper, because there's a part in the rite where it's asked to be produced, so they had to do it.
Yeah, create one.
Wow.
But essentially, what the mandate is not about the validity of the sacrament. It's about saying you're now part of the mission of this church here. You have the mandate to speak in the name of that church.
Yeah.
And that's why, quite correctly, Independent Sacramental Movement, of which now the SSPX are part, even if they might not like that.
They don't like it, but it's true.
They are now part of that movement, whether they like it or not.
Yep.
Okay.
It's almost word for word what happened with the old Catholics hundreds of years ago.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And by the way, with ICAB in 1948.
Yeah.
So, but essentially what they have, and this is why it's a problem, why the excommunication is by act, is precisely because Rome does recognize that they're bishops.
Yeah.
Right? So it absolutely recognizes the validity of their ordination, but they've said, but you didn't have the mandate, so you no longer have the authority to speak in the name of the church. Now, this shouldn't be controversial, because anybody that doesn't want to be in communion with the See of Peter accepts that. That's the sort of, you can't speak in the name of the Roman Catholic Church.
No, I mean, it becomes a matter of just practicality at that point. I mean, they can't speak for us either.
Well, so it's just about good ordering.
Yeah.
And so, it doesn't do for people in the Independent Sacramental Movement to say, nasty old Rome won't do anything for me. So, well, you're not in communion with them.
Well, yeah, but you can't.
We all get to make a decision.
With the exception, though, that you can't be claiming Christian unity and not give a path back. So if you're going to excommunicate, not so much for us, because again, even we're a somewhat different situation, but for the SSPX to be formally excommunicated and declared schismatic, and you have to give a path back that's reasonable to open dialogue. So with them, I guess.
Look, in fairness, they were given fair warning. They know the rules of the church. If you ordain somebody a bishop without a mandate, you don't need to be formally excommunicated. You are by act, and so and if you receive it, you're excommunicated by act. So I don't know. I don't think there's any dishonesty here. Now, I've got a lot of sympathy with the SSPX. I mean, I do like Latin and
sure.
all those sorts of things. I've got a lot of sympathy with them. I also think, as a political advisor, of which I have many years' experience, I think Rome dealt with this really poorly. Yeah. I think, purely political and nothing sacramental here. I'd say, well, the SSPX love to be in opposition, right? So they're kind of defined by opposing. They're oppositional. So why not just give them a mandate? Just very, you do your thing. Just go and do your thing.
I mean,
and it would have taken all the sting out of it. I think that would be my advice, but I'm not the Pope, and it's up to the Pope, and it's up to the magisterium.
Because I think it's an ego thing. I really do. And see, that's where I think that it crosses the line out of the theology and the original intention of the Gospels and what we see written there about authority and how we are to look at the successor of St. Peter. Because, I mean, my position has always been, if the successor of St. Peter is more than everything else, then maybe there should have been 4 levels of holy orders, and you got to go through another type of
7,
or maybe right. I mean, you could, but I mean, it's like he's just a bishop. He's just a bishop of Rome. That's all he is. And
I think you're right. I mean, going back to Vatican I, there is a serious discussion to be had about. So I don't doubt that the Pope is the successor of St. Peter.
Right. No, I don't think anybody does. Yeah.
But John, well, some people do, but John Paul II.
Well, yeah, Sedevacantis, but that's a whole other problem.
And so, but John Paul II, Pope Saint John Paul II, specifically foregrounded this. He said, look, I'm the successor of St. Peter. The church are the bishops gathered around the successor of Peter. But how that office is held, administered, spoken of, I'm up to discuss it. He literally said that. He explicitly and invited the Orthodox to have into that conversation, the Anglican, anybody, Protestants into that conversation, and almost everybody said no.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about it. So again, I'm just trying to provide a balance. I'm not saying that everything's wonderful about how this is administered. I'm just saying that there is also a willful look. We get used to being in charge of our own fiefdom. Most of us would probably rather run our own thing than be subject to someone else's authority. I know I would. I mean, bloody hell, when I was an Anglican, it was torture, you know. But especially when those bishops are heretics, it's very difficult. So, not my last bishop, I should say, just for the record, in case people know who that is. My last bishop is a saintly man, but the damage was done before him. I did. I just think it's wrong to suggest that it's all, you know, big bad Rome. And there are lines available for us to respond to that unity. I mean, obviously, in your case, you're a cradle Roman Catholic, so yours might not be very appealing, but your way back is to go to confession and to be received back into the church. Now, that would not include recognition of ordinations and what have you, but it could do. I mean, there are processes you can go through but it's bureaucratic because this is a church that's developed in Rome, in Italy, and they love bureaucracy there. They follow European style law, which I hate, and anyone from a common law tradition thinks is bonkers. But you know, but that's the way it is. But that's not to say there's no way back. There are ways.
There's a way back for me. There's not a way back for Nicolean Catholics.
Sure, I mean, but you know, anyone can be received, and I think, like I said, I sound like I'm like the legate from Rome. I'm not trying to be that. I'm just saying that, you know, I have a view of communion which I think is much more like what you're describing, which to a certain extent I am in communion with Rome, you know, but it's not a full communion with Rome. And I think
not from their vantage point. From theirs, no.
But I think, but in a way, they would say, well, they do, because they also, as part of their canon, say any baptized person has the dignity of being called a Christian, and that. So, in a sense, I mean, they don't say this explicitly, and this is again for pastoral reasons. They actually recognize any baptized person as a member of the Catholic Church, which is solid Catholic theology. Now, I'm not going to say that explicitly because they actually want Baptists to convert to Rome, you know. But I don't know. My view of communion is if you could assent to the creed and you've been baptized, then you're already part of the Catholic Church. It's just that, you know, jurisdictionally, and this is why, you know, the separation between validity and licity is actually quite useful. How we have that relationship with the successor of St. Peter and the formal kind of, you know, institution of what people call the Catholic Church, that's something that we work out in our own life. St. John Henry Newman is a great example of this. You know, just at various points in life, we end up in various degrees of communion with Rome, and in his case, he entered into full communion, became a cardinal. But many of his contemporaries didn't. Pusey didn't. You know, so. All of us are along that spectrum at some point or another, and sometimes we're called to sacrifice either to stay out of full communion or to enter full communion, and that's something we figure out in our own soul.
Yeah, and see, I don't think anybody, if they really are honest about it, would have a problem with that. You know, I think the problem really comes down to,
I think that's reality.
It is reality. And I mean, it's a very realistic way of looking at it. And this is the world in which we live. I mean, even the apostles themselves did not agree on everything. So why would the rest of the church over 2,000 years agree on everything? It's not going to happen. So more realistic would be to create a Christian unity that is attainable, not one that is oppressive or impossible. And I think what becomes problematic is not so much what you described, because that's all reasonable and all. I mean, and I don't have any problem with it. I've never renounced Rome. I've never renounced my Roman Catholic baptism or heritage or anything. I wouldn't use the Roman Catholic liturgy, if I wouldn't use the Novus Ordo, if I felt that the Pope was out of his mind. I mean, I'm not even, as far as I'm concerned, I'm more in line with the Pope than the SSPX is. You know, I mean, it's crazy when you look at it. I am
too.
Yeah, we both are. You know, when the Pope changes something, we usually go along with it. We don't really. Where it becomes problematic, I think, only really comes down to these excommunication declarations, or even just this automatic thing, because excommunication is, by the way, it's not really talked about. They don't really present it this way, but if you look into it, you see that it is. I mean, you're talking mortal sin. So if you're telling someone they're excommunicated, you're basically saying you're going to hell until you fix this. And that's where it starts to get, I think, problematic for the independent churches, and where, you know, people start to rebel. And I wouldn't even say that, look, I want to make it very clear, in case it's not. Hopefully it was, but I'm not sure. The Holy Nicolean Catholic Church was not created, and I do not hold administration over this church as an act of rebellion against the Church of Rome. I'm hard on the Church of Rome, maybe because I love it. You know, you're only hard on that which you love, and so therefore, you know, I've never acted in this capacity as an act of rebellion. Be like, look at how much better I am at it. I know I'm not as good at the magisterium as they are. That's why I follow what the magisterium says, because I know I'm not, as one man who hasn't had the benefit of all of the years of education that they themselves are able to have. I have to yield to their theological insights. The only time we shift, and I hope that came across in the last episode about esoteric Christianity, the only time we shift is when there's practical concerns that are not being properly addressed in the field, where now it's like, okay, now we have to discuss this.
I think we can, you know, and I actually think the Catholic Church, I think it is open to this, or certainly has been in recent years. But it acknowledges that God is at work, the Holy Spirit is at work outside of the formal structures of the Catholic Church, of course.
Sure.
I say of course, but actually that only really started to creep into their theology in about the 1930s. Anyway. And
SSPX doesn't like all that.
No, they don't. That's true.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a recognition of that. And so, you know, schism is a wound in the life of in the body of Christ. It's not an inconvenience. It's not about. It involves bureaucracy, but the reason it's a concern is not bureaucratic. It's because it's a wound. If we were unified, we'd have a much stronger voice. If we were unified, maybe Marx wouldn't have had his inroads. Maybe Lenin wouldn't have started that evil regime in Russia. If we were unified, maybe not. But it's also true to say that, I started by saying this, that the idea of unity or conformity, the level of conformity we're talking about now, is like that didn't exist in 1,000 years ago.
No, it didn't.
There's no way.
No,
it couldn't. And so, I mean, it wasn't until the ecumenical councils ending in Constantinople that we even agreed on the doctrine of Jesus Christ. So, we know for the first 400 years of the life of the church, there was no sense of that kind of what we now call communion.
That's true.
Which is all
no,
about,
you're really right. Yeah, you're spot
Yeah.
on. You're spot on. That is very true. And I think it actually speaks to some of the reasons behind this church, because we have always presented ourselves as an expression of early Christianity, not layered with tons of bureaucracy and administrative red tape and all that stuff. We've always talked about how we try to be as apostolic as we can, but not just in the terms of maintaining a succession, but also in terms of what is the closest to the feeling of that early church. And I think there is a place for that. Whereas the SSPX, look, far be it from me to defend them, because they probably would hate us, but I will defend them as a libertarian would defend anybody who, their right to exist. There's a place for them. There is a need in the church, And there's nothing wrong with there being a super traditional conservative form of Christianity any more than there's anything wrong with us in the Nicolaitan Church having a super early interpretation of apostolic Christianity that still maintains its connection to the developments of the church in subsequent years, but still tries to get back to that feeling of where we weren't so burdened with doctrinal law and canon requirements and consequences and punishments and, mandates. I think there's something to be said for a church that operates that way too. And I think the only problem is that because Rome doesn't really
if you don't have boundaries, you don't have a body. If your body had no boundaries, you wouldn't cohere as a person. And the body of Christ is no different. You're right, though. The problem is where all of the focus is on the boundary instead of the body, right? It's but there's a balance to be struck.
Look at it also though from the constriction that can occur with boundary too. Look at the human body. Okay, I always say when you're in doubt and you're not sure, look at what God created because the answer is almost always there. So I look at the human body. All right, we are contained by our epidermis, right? That holds us together. With the bones and muscles, but still, we're contained in that structure. Now, just imagine if the epidermis was all throughout. Instead of just being the surface that covers everything, just imagine if that boundary that holds us together were to permeate every aspect. The heart couldn't beat, the lungs couldn't breathe, we couldn't move, we would simply immediately die. A lot of people would argue, me being one of them, that the boundary that Rome has tried to maintain has gotten stiffer and tighter and smaller as the years have gone on, to the point that now the church has become restrictive and oppressive to other traditions that maybe see the same Christ, in a different flavor, not necessarily a different theology, but perhaps experience him differently because, Christ is unique to each and every one of us, as well as the universal concepts that we see in the scripture, but the personal relationship's different.
Their explicit teaching on sacraments being valid outside of their control actually suggests that they've got less. They've expanded that, right? So, that sort of language you wouldn't have heard at Trent, but you did hear it at Vatican.
Oh, it's gotten better. Oh, there's no question about it. It's gotten better.
And I think if I look at, because I've been involved in ecumenism for a long time, because when I was an Anglican, I longed for full communion with the Catholic Church, right? I was one of them. If I look at who's put the boundaries up, overwhelmingly, it's not on the side of the Catholic Church.
It depends on how you look at it.
Because, of course it depends how you look at it. But for example, Roman Catholic Church was pretty close to reversing apostolic curiae. The Anglican laws were utterly null and void.
Yeah.
That was a question about validity, not justlicity. That was going to be reversed because the old Catholics of Utrecht had taken part in the consecrations of all Anglican bishops by the 1930s. So that was going to be undone. But in 1992, the Church of England decided to ordain women,
and that ruined it. Yeah.
So who put the barrier up there? Now, if you're a progressive Anglican, you say, oh well, Rome would put the barrier up because they won't ordain women. Well, I say, well, actually, consistently, if you look at the Archic document, sorry, I'm really getting into the weeds now. I'll stop. But if you look at the Archic documents, which is the dialogue between Anglicans and the Roman Catholic Church, which is mainly the dialogue between the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church, because the problem with Anglicanism is it now means anything in any country, any diocese, depending on who your bishop is. But at least the Church of England, because it's the established church, as terrible as it is, it actually has you can say authoritatively, this is what we teach, right?
Yeah.
And so, but all of the dialogue, anytime they get close to communion, the Church of England throws another spanner in the works.
There's certainly times where well, it's a seesaw. I think it's a seesaw effect,
It's
and
why,
sometimes
by the way, it's why I left Anglicanism. It's
Sure.
why I left Anglicanism. I thought, no, you are not genuine here. You know, this is not ecumenical dialogue. This is let's be nice to each other, and why don't you just affirm everything we do? That's not the same thing. And so that's why I left it and ended up with ICAB. You know,
I think
and
for Nicolayan Catholics, okay, one of the problems that we have had in our experience with Rome has been the way that we've been treated, not by the Vatican because they really don't talk to us, although they follow us closely, because there was a time, I haven't looked in a long time, but there was a time where esotericcatholic.org was getting like hit after hit daily, sometimes several times a day from Vatican City. We were getting a lot, because you can't necessarily see who's looking at your website, but you can trace the IP back to where it's coming from if they're not using a DNS or something like that. So we were getting hits a lot. So clearly they paid attention to us. I don't think that really was a big issue until Ghost Adventures, and I guess people started like, who is this guy? Is he really a Catholic? Where'd he come from? Where, these questions came up. Of course, they wouldn't ask me. They just go behind my back and try to figure it out, and then make up shit what they can't figure out. But the issue really came. We had no issue, and I want to also say, in the early days of the Nicolayan Church, one of the parts of the history of this church that I don't think a lot of people know about, because I don't really discuss it anymore, is that we talked about how it's a blend of East and West, right? We have an iconostasis. We have a cuneiform altar that looks away from the people. We don't follow that part of the Vatican II. We haven't changed. We have a lot of Eastern aspects. We use an Eastern censer. We have icons and statues.
I do remind these progressive Roman Catholics that Vatican II doesn't order that they celebrate.
No, that they do it. They do it. And
Right?
Yeah. It just made it possible.
It's become the situation now where we've got Roman Catholic priests here who are not allowed to. They're not had their faculties removed, not been disciplined, but they've got no parish because they like to do things the old-fashioned way. And so it tells you that even though they've been punished for actually not breaching any law.
I know. That's what I'm trying to say, and that's where it goes the other way on that seesaw that I was talking about. Because with us, like the church, that East and West used to be separate. There was the Holy Nicolayan Catholic Church, which was the Western arm of the church. And then there was the Russian Imperial Orthodox Church, which was the Eastern arm of the church. And that had its own foundational, and I was the patriarch of both of them. There were a lot of things that happened that led to the dissolution of the Russian church, but it all became absorbed into the Holy Nicolayan Catholic Church. And that is how it's existed ever since. Now, that being said, what I find interesting is the whole time we operated as the Imperial Russian Orthodox Church, there was never one Orthodox minister, priest, layperson, bishop, patriarch that ever reached out to us, attacked us, did anything that's, who the hell do you think you are? Never once. I mean, we left them alone. They left us alone. And even if I talk to a Orthodox layperson, it was only but good things that they would say. Sometimes they come in, they see the iconostasis online, and be like, "Oh, this is wonderful." Now, I wish I could say that for the Holy Nicolayan Catholic Church, but we have been nothing but attacked consistently. Now, not by Pope Leo and not by cardinals, but certainly by priests and lay people that hold certain rank within the church, like Catholic Answers. I'll never forget one time during COVID when we started being asked, could you do your mass? Could you stream your mass? Because we can't go. People were prevented from being able to go to church. And I guess they wanted to have some connection, rightfully so. And so that's when we started streaming our mass. We never did that before. We did it because of that, right? Remember? Mm-hmm. We were asked and we did it.
Temporary.
It was supposed to be just a temporary thing. It ended up becoming a hallmark of this church now. I don't think people they'd riot if we took it away, at least the people that care about it. But we were having one of our normal masses during the COVID period, when we got infiltrated by, I always suspected it was somebody affiliated with Catholic Answers, because around the same time we were getting a lot of problems with them. Long story short, somebody put a very nasty post about me and this church on their forums that they had at that time. They don't have the forums anymore, but they did at that time. And we had our lawyer reach out and say, this is libel, this is defamation of character, take it down. They absolutely refused. I went on Twitter and called them out on Twitter, because they're pretty active on Twitter, and I was too at that time, and indicated, what they were doing and what we've asked and how they will not comply with our lawyer's wishes and the horrible things that are lies that are being said. And I said, this violates, I told them on Twitter, it wasn't X then, it was true Twitter. I said, these posts that we're asking you to take down violate your own terms of service. So why would you, as a Christian, allow that to be published, that rubbish to be published on your Catholic's website? And you know how they responded? Catholic Answers responded to me. You know what they did? They responded to me with a winking emoji. Later that week or that month, I couldn't remember now, it all blends together, we were having Mass when we became infiltrated by 2 or 3 Roman Catholic priests. It was Father something, and we looked them up. They were real. And they heckled. They heckled me through the whole Mass, talking about how my chapel looked like the gay bar from the Blue Oyster gay bar from the Police Academy movies. Orthodox priests would have never done that to us. They never did do that to us, even when we were using the Orthodox.
But that's not the magisterium.
No, and I said that earlier. I said the Pope never did that. The cardinals never did. However, what I'm trying to say, though, is that this is a prevailing Roman Catholic attitude that is an absolute barrier to anybody in the ISM, because I can tell you from personal experience, we're not the only church that gets treated this way. We are treated at best. The best we can hope for is they're irrelevant. That's the best you can hope for, because at least you get left alone.
I remember there was a picture that, because it was put in the news here, because it was when I was ordained by the Brazilian Catholic Church. There was a picture of me and the bishop and the other guy I was ordained with, on one of the Facebook, the clerical dress pages and like that, they put a picture of us, and somebody reposted this picture, and and it's supposed to be about the chasubles, and it's supposed to be about clerical dress, but inevitably someone, I won't say who, but somebody who I did know, who was then an Anglican deacon, had said, "Oh, but our ICAB orders even valid."
Man.
And I put under that, well, they're at least as valid as your ordination as deacon by a female Anglican bishop.
Ouch.
Well said.
Ouch.
Well said. I mean,
I have to say, like, because I knew him, and sometimes I use sharp points and humor to make a point. He is now in full communion with the Catholic Church.
Well, good for him.
Well, good. And
And he needed someone like me to give him a punch in the face to get him to snap out of this dream he was in.
I don't have a problem. Look, and this is why I said what I said. Okay, we don't have a problem with Rome. And this was not Rome doing these things to us. We recognize, we know that Catholic Answers isn't Rome. We know that these priests that came in and infiltrated our Mass and acted like this during a Holy Mass, okay, we know that's not Rome. But the fact of the matter is, there's something fundamentally wrong with your process when you have people in these positions that feel that they can act this way with impunity, and they did, and they do, and they still do. And that is fundamentally a massive barrier to unity. That's a massive barrier to any kind of Christian charity. Then you have to ask yourself, okay, I'm the excommunicated one, supposedly, maybe not. I don't know. They won't. I mean, I'm not important enough to even tell me if I am. But I'm the one that's going to hell? Really? Okay, I'm the one that's my internal soul's in danger when all I do is send people back to you. I baptize people, I send them back to you. But you're infiltrating independent churches, and you're heckling a priest while he says mass.
Sure.
I mean, you know what I mean?
Grow up.
I think all of this is the burden of how connected we are today by shipping routes, by
that's
planes,
true.
by the internet. So, you know, and it cuts both ways. It means that Rome's authority goes to your iPhone, but it also means that you can have the internet and gather people in as well.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. I mean, no, you're not wrong at all. I agree with everything you said, honestly. I think there's a long way to go, and the ISM, though, I think the moral of the story here is that the ISM shouldn't have to exist, but it needs to right now. Maybe someday in some perfect future, assuming we ever get one. I doubt it, but let's be hopeful. Christians are, of course, called to hope. Yeah, God is working out his plan.
God's working out his plan.
Maybe in some future we won't need ISM churches. Maybe there'll be probably because the Christian community is so small, they won't have any choice but to find them. They need to be together because they'll be so small with all the materialism out there, right? Okay, so that's the end of this special. We will be back next month, okay? August 25th, 8 p.m. Eastern. That's Tuesday, August 25th, with open lines, open topics. So you've got a whole month, okay, to start getting your questions together for us. And we will be answering. A whole panel will be here, Father Chris and April and Jamie. Thank you all for being here tonight and being a part of this. I hope that this has led to some kind of understanding as to what we're all about, and that we're not these evil demons that are, creating these weird little Protestant churches. And I don't protest. I'm not a Protestant because I don't protest the Pope. I don't. I see myself as being in unity with him in the same way that Paul saw himself in unity with Peter. If that's a problem, well, then I guess, maybe take it up with Jesus because he wasn't more specific about what he meant, okay? Yeah, take it up with Jesus. He knows. He'll set it straight, okay? Anyway, thank you all for being here tonight, and our moderators and all the great help that you provide. We could not do what we do without you, and we love each and every one of you. Until next month, I'll see you out there in the ether. God bless everyone.
Take care, everybody.